Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special council meeting of Tuesday, December 7th. We're going to deal with our water and wastewater capital and operating budget, special projects budget, and the 2022 operating budget today. We have council in chambers, and we have Councillor Seymour Fagan is zooming in to the meeting as we speak. So I'll call the meeting to order. I'll ask for a motion, please, for the adoption of the agenda. Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favor? And that's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in anything on today's agenda? Seeing none, we have no deputations. We have no correspondence. We're going to move right into item 6. Should be a quick verbal update from Director Stover regarding the OSIF funding.
Thank you, Mayor Letham. Yes, it's a very quick update. We were of the impression that we were going to get an announcement last week on the additional allocation for OSIF grant funding. That announcement is now scheduled for this Friday, so I don't have an update to give council, but we will come forward with the information once it's received.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask for a motion to receive the update and request that staff report back to council once additional OSIF funding is known, with options to utilize these funds, including consideration for resurfacing of low-volume gravel roads. I think that'll tidy it up. Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. Questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Okay, we'll move down to item 7, presentation. We're going to look at the water and wastewater capital and operating budget first. We're going to get a quick presentation, so I'll turn it over to Director Robinson. Right, there he is. Okay, welcome, Director Robinson. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, just wanted to take opportunity today to provide overview of the 2022 operating budget, including capital and rates and so on as well. So I'm going to go through the presentation initially, and then we'll turn it over to Director Rojas briefly for review of capital. Is the presentation available? Very good. So this is obviously an intro page if you want to move to the next slide. As we have the conversation here, just wanted to go through a bit of background on how the user rate works. So it's supported by multiple different departments within the city. Public Works obviously provides the operational frontline management of our systems. The Engineering and Corporate Assets Department provides capital planning, construction, administration, asset management, capacity review and allocation, and service connection installation. So their portfolio is expanded within the realm of water wastewater operations. Has been that way since 2016, but again, continuing to adjust those responsibilities. Our corporate services department also provides support through rev and taxation, purchasing, obviously procurement, both for capital and operating works. Our IT department and human resources obviously provide support to the department as well, or the user rate as well. Next slide, please. As council has been, I guess, reviewed several times now, one of the biggest impacts was the Walkerton disaster and resulting Safe Drinking Water Act legislation that came about in 2002. Again, it's to recognize that the people of Ontario are entitled to expect their drinking water to be safe, to provide protection for human health and prevention of drinking water health hazards through control and regulation of drinking water systems and drinking water testing. So this is a piece of legislation that's come about since 2002, has been refined, and is one of the biggest impacts and requirements with respect to operation and capital and other facets well of the drinking water system. So just as a reminder, next slide, please. We have within the city of Kawartha Lakes 21 drinking water systems, 6 wastewater systems, and 36 community wells. Of those systems right now, the 21 drinking water systems, the city internally is operating 3 of the treatment facilities, 18 are under contract. We operate all of the drinking water distribution and wastewater collection systems as well. There's a varying source between surface water and groundwater. Suffice to say, it's a very complex series of systems that the city has distributed over a very large area. Next slide, please. So this is just a very quick overview of the proposed 2022 operating budget and where the costs lie. So the interfunctional adjustments is costs like the IT, all those other types of costs blended in to that rate. Salaries and benefits is 8%. Material supply and services falls into about 5%. Contracted services, that obviously is the primary contract that we have currently in place with Aqua to operate the drinking water systems and wastewater treatment systems. But it also includes other costs for material procurement and supplies that we need to operate our systems. And the other portion down the bottom, 27%, is our debt, leasing, and financing component of the budget. Next slide, please. 2021 operational highlights. We didn't have the opportunity to talk about these when we met previously. So just to briefly go through 2021 successes. Again, we successfully maintained our QMS accreditation. Council is going to see the follow-up to that report on December the 14th. Looking and bringing more information about the QMS program to council. QMS is the quality management system. Water, wastewater, updated. We updated the services bylaw for water, wastewater to clarify and provide some better controls within that area of our business. We transitioned the operations for Manila and Saulnier, the drinking water systems. That was part of the operational contract and review and recommendation to council. So that's fully transitioned through 2021. And you'll see resources in place now expected for that for 2022. Support for capital works, again, within our engineering group, there's again, a large portfolio required for capital projects. So within our operational group, we actually completed one of the capital projects for filter media replacement and then supported the requirements in the field for multiple water main replacements through 2021. Next slide, please. 2022, our operating budget is again comprised of our day-to-day operational costs, debenture repayment, contributions to reserves to fund the capital budget. So again, that's money coming in from the user rate and others going into reserves to be able to fund those programs efficiently, and revenues from those users. So those are I guess the main focus of where those budgets are coming from that support the user rate. Next slide, please. So 2022 direction and pressures. So the direction, we want to continue to support contractual renewals, chemical and operations. So there are, again, we have the primary contract for the operating authority in place right now. It's a multi-year contract, so we're stable there for the time being. There's a number of minor support. So again, that's chemicals, that's other types of support for the operations that we're continuing to need to put in place. We're going to continue to assess and implement the sewer surcharge program that was approved by council several years ago. We're going to focus on public education this year. We have experienced a number of recent events where misuse of the sewer system is contributing to sewer backups and concerns related to operation and maintenance of our system, especially when we see grease coming from commercial establishments. So we're going to look towards focusing on that education component and enforcement through 2022. And again, supporting our capital project execution within our capital group. Pressures on the budget, we see debenture principal and interest as a continual pressure within that within the user rate. Again, clarified that we have our internal caps and on that system or on that budget, but we'll continue to see those pressures come forward. The CPI for the operational contract is a traditional pressure under that contract. And we'll see those pressures moving forward as we continue that contract. From a capital perspective, we're going to see increase project management costs and infrastructure requirements. So you'll see as part of the budget, there'll be some increases for capital requirements under the operating budget. So that would be their resources that fall within the operating realm as opposed to capital. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of some of the background work that happens within our department. So in 2020, the Engineering and Corporate Assets Department retained Watson Associates to complete a water wastewater rate study and a financial plan. This is a document that is required under legislation to have a plan in place to ensure that the system is adequately funded and sustainable. So that plan was presented to council and adopted in March of 2021, and been advised through the financial evaluation and calculation that the 2022 budget has been prepared in alignment with this plan and proposes a 3% increase in general for the user rate. So from there, I will ask if there's any questions on that portion, and then we'll pass things through to Director Rojas to have a conversation about capital.
Thank you, Director. Any questions on the operating portion? Councillor Helmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Director or the Director. Just a couple of things. You alluded to pressures from the Consumer Price Index, and the CPI, I think with inflation, I think last month they were talking about 4% increase for the month. Is that, how does the CPI, we take the yearly average from the previous year, or which one do we use?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I don't have the contract in front of me. The contract that we have in place for Aqua does have a component that it raises the contract on an annual basis in accordance with CPI. I'm not sure if it's an annual or if it's a blended or actual monthly or at the time of. But we can get that information and provide it to you if needed.
Would Director Stover have an answer, perhaps?
Yeah, so I agree with Brian. I don't have the contract in front of me either, but typically it'll be a year over year. It'll define the period of time. But the 4% increase that we just put in place for our fees and charges bylaw was the actual increase over the last year. I think it was June to June or July to July, whatever the most recent CPI data that we had. So it was a full year.
Thank you. So that kind of triggers my next question. If the CPI is, if we're looking at 4%, does the 3% increase to the budget cover that? And also, on an average household, how much would a 3% increase represent if you have that information?
Caroline, did you had your hand up? Maybe.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Sorry, through you to Councillor Elmsley. There is actually, we did have a late adjustment to the Aqua contracts. The manager put in the 4% increase. I just wanted to confirm that I know that the CPI used was 4% for the Aqua contract. Now I'll pass over to Director Stover for the average increase per household. And it does cover, the 3% does cover that increase as well.
Yes, so I actually don't have the information as to the cost per the average household, but we can get that and provide it to you after the break.
Mr. Mayor, just to interject, it's Brian. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, staff have just sent me a quick email here. Some pretty efficient staff working in the background. Aqua CPI is determined from September preceding the contract year. So the 2022 CPI increases is the CPI as of September 2021. And the contract does include a contract limit of 3% CPI. So,
Okay, we're good. Thank you. Any other questions on the operating portion of the presentation? Seeing none, let's move on to the capital. Thank you, Director. Is Director Rojas taking it for capital?
Correct.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So, sorry, if we could have the presentation back up. Okay, so water and wastewater capital. There's 2 slides, short and sweet, but there's a lot of information on here. This does correspond to the 2022 proposed budget and business plan that council received, or we went over at last council meeting. So these are the details can be found in pages 170 to 175 of that budget book. Next slide, please. So, sorry, hold on. So this is a summary of our capital programs. So there are essentially 5 programs. I'll briefly go through each, sorry, there are 4 program categories. I'll briefly go through all 4 of them. So the first one is water treatment at 3.3 million. So this would correspond to page 171 of your budget book. We are proposing 8 individual projects, upgrades to water treatments in Lindsay, Woodville, Bobcaygeon, Fenland Falls, and Manila, as detailed on page 171. The lion's share of the 3.3 million is in Lindsay, where there is a 2.7 million upgrade to the water treatment plant. The next project is the wastewater treatment. Again, page 172 in your budget book. So we are proposing 5 programs in Omemee, Bobcaygeon, Coboconk, and Lindsay, with the largest project being the Coboconk Water Pollution Control Plant Lagoons at 750,000 of that 1.2 million. The third category is by far the largest, the wastewater distribution and collection. So this would be the actual linear water main or sewers within the road right away. The largest, well, there's 3 projects, the William Street mains, the York Street and Peel mains, and the Murray Street mains. So those are, the first 2 are the Lindsay downtown, phase 4, related infrastructure that go with the road component, and Murray Street is in Fenland Falls. Again, the related infrastructure that go with the road component. Those 3 combined are 3.04 million of the $5 million projects, but we're essentially proposing 13 projects all throughout urban areas in Kawartha Lakes. Again, that would correspond to page 173 and 174 of your budget book. The last category, studies and special projects, which is different than special projects coming up. This is a category under water, wastewater. There's only 2 projects, one in Lindsay for the water treatment plant, carbon dioxide and polymer system study at 35,000, and one in Bobcaygeon for the water treatment plant process optimization study at 50,000, which gives you the 85,000. Next slide, please. So the 9.61 million that's identified for all 4 programs is broken up into, they're all replacement and upgrades due to age asset. There is a small portion, 781,000, related to growth, where we're increasing some capacity, but by far the lion's share is to address our aged water, wastewater infrastructure. And that's my last slide.
Thank you, Director. We do have a question. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. With all the building we got going on and coming on in the Lindsay area specifically, are we staying ahead of the game? Because I do get the odd question with all the building, are we, do we still have capacity? Is it built in there?
So, it's sort of I'll answer the question in 2 parts. So within the urban boundary, so in the northwest, particularly in Lindsay, we have quite a lot of activity. In 2021, we retained, I think, Bennett Construction to work on the water pollution control plant in Lindsay. And that's a $20 million job that's been funded identified over the next 2-3 years. So that's in accordance with our EA that was done to accommodate growth. Now, as council's aware, there are some external development opportunities in Lindsay through various MZOs. So those service components will still need to be addressed, but within the approved servicing boundary and with our existing growth management strategy, the answer is yes. But there's more work that needs to be done to accommodate additional growth areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the capital portion of the budget, water and wastewater? Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Director Rojas. To do with the Omimi rehabilitation, we had a meeting about a year ago, and it was determined that it would be around 500,000, but I see 50,000 here. Has that been scaled back, or what's the update on that project for the Omimi site?
Yeah, fair enough. So I think the 50,000 is the 50,000 is on page 172 of your budget book. That's simply for the Omimi driveways and berms. So that's some grading, driveway improvements. So that has nothing to do with the capacity of the lagoons and the spray irrigation and the subsurface. So the 50,000 is strictly for site conditions, nothing to do with capacity. I recently had a meeting with the ministry regarding the EA that's currently underway. We plan to have that wrapped up by the end of this year. So the solution is twofold. So we're going to provide betterment for the subsurface system that's not working at full capacity, but also we're going to propose to keep the spray irrigation. So the spray irrigation is a tested system. There's really no concerns on the city's part with continuing the spray irrigation. We just have to catch up with the paperwork. Our operations department has been utilizing that spray irrigation for various ongoing for various years. So it's just making our compliance permit match the actual. So there is going to be some modifications in order to have a dual subsurface spray irrigation that has to be done. But we're proposing to do that in 2023 because we still need to consult, wrap up the EA. There's an appeal period, and then we will implement in 2023. There are some operational enhancements that can be done in 2022, but anything substantial will be done in 2023. It doesn't impact any, currently, it doesn't impact any growth happening in Omimi over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Councillor Yeo.
Thank you, and through you to Director Rojas. The Coboconk Lagoon project, is this just part of an ongoing upgrade or clean out, or is this going to do something about the odor complaint we've had for years now? Is this, or a combination of both?
So through the mayor to the councillor, again, it's listed on page 172 at a cost of $750,000 for rehabilitation. So yes, lagoons need maintenance. We did some lagoon clean out in Lindsay recently. So it would address some capacity issues. Again, over time, the lagoons get filled up with sludge and they need to be rehabbed. Will it address the odor problem? Lagoons are smelly to begin with, but it should reduce it. It shouldn't eliminate it altogether, but my thinking is that it should at least alleviate some of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the capital portion of the water and wastewater budget? Okay, I'm just going to ask for a motion, please, to receive the presentation on the water and wastewater capital and operating budget. Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Yeo. All in favor? That's passed. So on your pages, are there any questions? I don't have any ahead of time. Are there any questions on the operating or capital portion of water and wastewater in your budget book. I don't think we need to go through it page by page. We kind of just did. Are there any outstanding questions? Director, go ahead.
Through the mayor, just wanted to respond to Councillor Elmsley's earlier question. The increase to the average user on the assumption they use 175 cubic meters of water a year, which is generally an average user, the increase will be $45 a year.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions there. We only had one decision unit for water and wastewater, and that was regarding, from Councillor Vale, regarding the water source for the village of Woodville. My understanding, we're going to deal with that in January through a memo to council when we can have all the information in front of us. So you're okay with that? Okay. So then if there's no further questions, I'm just looking for a motion that 2022 water and wastewater capital and operating budget be approved. Councillor Dunn, second by Councillor Yeo. Any questions? Call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Okay, let's go down to special projects. Is our next part of the budget? Director Stover, you're going to give us a presentation on special projects. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So this is some slides that you saw on the evening meeting on the November 18th. So the special projects budget, again, was a decision that this council made, and I think it was a good one, to pull out of the operating budget those one-time expenditures that don't generate a capital asset, but can be quite costly, and they're primarily related to studies and plans, but there's also some IT infrastructure that's included in the special projects budget. The last couple of years, we have included some items that were really annual programs. There are things that were happening year over year. And so for 2022, we decided that it really didn't make sense for those to sit in the special projects budget. We've moved them back to the operating budget. And so when we get to community services, predominantly was impacted by this decision. And so you'll see some increases in their operating budget. Really not an increase, it's just transferring it out of special projects and moving it back into the operating budget. And I'm sure the director will explain that when he gets to those line items. So the special projects budget in a nutshell, we've got $1.7 million being spent on studies and plans. I can't even read that slide, 0.8 on technology, 0.6 on technology, 0.6 million. And the special projects budget is predominantly funded through the tax levy. 1.8 million is included in the operating budget to be allocated over to this budget. 0.3 million from development charges and 0.2 million from other reserves. And that's my overview.
Thank you. Any questions on the presentation for special projects? Can I get a motion to receive the presentation for special projects, please? Councillor Vale, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? That's passed. I'll just ask you to go to page 221 in your budget book. Special projects, 221, 222, 223. There's a couple of questions. Councillor Richardson had a question on page 221 about studies. Say doing some of the studies in-house, some of the money we spend, consultants. There was an answer provided. Are you okay with the answer? Are you looking for further clarification?
Yes, and through you. The reason I brought that up, I was just, we spend so much money every year going through these studies, and I recognize that some are more comprehensive than others. And I was just looking for, is it possible to do some of these studies in-house just so we can save some money? So it was just a question overall, if I could just have some more clarification. Thank you.
Yep, CAO, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So that the general response was that there are a number of legislated studies that we're obligated and quite frankly should be doing, and they should be done by third-party experts, and that's sort of regular and throughout our overall budget planning. Great question in terms of, can we do some of these studies in-house? I would suggest that there are, quite frankly, limitations. It's not the expertise of the staff, it's just the overall sort of resources. So you'll find that we do a number of, general reviews or studies, non-legislated. We'll do those in-house as best we can, but it will not negate the need for third-party studies on a variety, particularly the ones you're seeing in this budget, which are large-scale master plans that require a number of expertise brought to the table. But staff are integrated in those studies and processes throughout.
Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick one. Under financing, it says other. Is that from reserve, or what does the other refer to? It's for the bridge structure study and transportation master plan have amounts under other.
Director, go ahead.
Through the mayor, if you look to the very far column, there's other financing source. And so what we have done is to try and truncate keep these charts as big as possible so that you can actually read them. Rather than identifying every funding source in its own column, we created one that's called Other, so that if it's a funding source that's not commonly used throughout this budget, and then we've put the descriptor of which reserve or which funding source in that very last column. So both of those that you're referring to is coming from the contingency reserve.
Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question, and I guess it's more a matter of practice. We use the tax base to put money into the contingency reserve, and then in order to cover the costs off, we take it out there so we can say we didn't raise taxes. And I don't know if we're planning on doing something rather than taking it out of contingency reserves, which is not what I view that. For me, contingency reserve is something went wrong and we got to have money to fix it. But to actually budget it in when we're budgeting it from the tax base anyway, I just find that sort of, I don't know, disingenuous, I guess. It just doesn't quite sit with me proper, that's all.
Caroline is going to respond. Go ahead.
Through you to the councillor. The fact that we're using this money from the contingency reserve is that this money was put aside specifically for various engineering studies to fund them back before special projects started, and they hadn't used all the money, so I was bringing out those monies to fund engineering studies, which was what they were put away for.
Thank you. Any other questions on that portion? Okay, on page 223, I had a question about the economic development 5-year strategy. My question was just that could it be funded from the economic development reserve, which we've now combined. There's almost 600,000 or something in there. The answer is yes. I was just curious, so I don't have anything further, but if council wishes to, that's an option. So, Councillor Elmsley?
Are you looking for a motion?
I think we should. I think we should consider it. I would certainly support it, but I'm not. I just wanted it there to see if it was possible. It's there is some good money in that reserve.
Yeah, I give you a motion that that 60,000 should come out of the economic development reserve rather than from the tax levy.
So that the economic development strategy be funded from the economic development reserve as opposed to the tax levy. Yep. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. Any questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Let me just make a note of that. The only decision unit that I had for special projects was drainage work on Long Beach Road, which was brought forward by council resolution that the cost and design for the drainage work on Long Beach Road, estimated at $20,000, be brought forward as a decision unit for consideration in the 2022 capital budgeting process. If council opts to proceed with this project, $20,000 will need to be added to the special projects budget. So that is here as a decision unit. Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you. I'm wondering if I could ask a question of Director Rojas before doing anything.
Sure can. There you are. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you tell me the implications of this drainage work in terms of Long Beach Road? Are we planning on ripping out docks, or what is the way we are going forward with this work?
Thank you. Through you to the councilor, through the mayor. So there is no plans on ripping out any docks. We might have to install some culverts and an outlet. This will also potentially tie into a future development in this area. I believe Flato had an open house regarding a golf course or some resort potential developments in this area, which may be impacted by the drainage work. So the study is to review the catchment of this area and install some culverts, cross culverts, in order to alleviate some of the drainage concerns. But it's my understanding that the docks themselves would not be impacted.
Thank you.
If I could just follow up on that, Director. So do you see this as a priority project, or is this something that should wait till we see the future development behind that area and sort of tie it all in together? I know it's been some flooding issues, drainage issues there for quite a while, but do you see that as something that we're better to maybe wait and see how it ties in, or better to do right now and alleviate some of the pressure?
So to you, Mr. Mayor, so it really depends on the timing of development. So if development is within the next couple years, my recommendation is to address the flooding issue, or the flooding issue, or the drainage issue would be addressed through development, because we would have a full stormwater management plan, external plans, because it's a quite significantly large development. If the development is 10 years, 15 years away, then we can do an interim scenario prior to development going. It's not a lot of money, 20,000, but I know we're tight budget-wise. So my recommendation is to maybe put it off a year and see where the development process is for that golf course / resort proposal.
Agree, thank you. I'm just wondering if you would consider a motion to maybe bring it forward in the 2023 budget for consideration.
I would, as long as it's not a decision unit, that it's actually done, because we do have considerable flooding, particularly in the spring in that area. And I think we don't have anything in front of us from Flato in terms of project or anything else, but yet there is still problems in that area with drainage. So I would like it in the 2023 budget if that sounds reasonable.
So the drainage work on Long Beach Road for 20,000 be included in the 2023 special project budget when it's brought forward?
Yes.
That's your motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Yeo. Any questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Any other questions on decision units, questions on special projects? Can I get a motion that the 2022 special projects budget, it's not amended, is it? We just changed the funding source, we didn't amend the budget. The 2022 special projects budget be approved. Sorry? Oh, it is as amended. Okay. As amended. Councillor Riley, seconded by Councillor Yeo. Any questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go to operating budget. We'll dive right in. We have Director Stover's going to give us an overview presentation on operating budget. So I will, item 9, turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to share this presentation with the CAO, but we'll start just An overview of the 2022 proposed operating budget, sitting at $221 million. The largest component of that, of course, is salaries, wages, and benefits, typical for a service provider. Salaries and benefits sitting at almost $75 million, and that includes all the contractual increases that are required under our various collective agreements, as well as some new positions that the CAO will speak to in a moment. Transfers to external clients of $46.8 million. The majority of that would be in human services, where we get grant funding coming in from the province that we are the flow through, and it goes out to other agencies. The amount that we pay to the OPP would also be sitting in there. Contracted services of $43.7 million is a good chunk of our budget, but some of the major components that would be included in that is our waste management costs, winter control costs, anything that we contract out to have those services done by a third party. Transfers to reserve of $24.1 million. Those are funds that we have set aside in the operating budget to transfer out to reserves to fund future capital expenditures. Largest component, of course, being for the General Capital Reserve, which funds the bulk of our capital program. There's a little over $11 million for that purpose. Materials, supplies, and services at $16.8 million would be things like our fuel and utility budgets, our sand and salt for winter maintenance, things of that nature. Our debt and financing costs of $11 million. That's the principal and interest of our debt is the primary component of that. And then other of $3.8 million, a myriad of smaller items. The revenues that we receive that also match the $221 million, we have to have a balanced budget. Taxation, of course, is our largest component of our budget, and that's typical of what you'd see in any municipality. Taxation coming in at $130.1 million. Grants is our second largest component at $55.5 million. And that's, again, things like the OMPF grant and funding that we get in from the province to support some of our human services initiatives. User charges at $27.7 million. That would be things like our user fees within Parks and Recreation, as an example, and then our other revenue at $7.8 million. Of course, this is very high level, but the details of this would be in the pages of the budget that we're going to walk through. So our key drivers, salaries and benefits, as I said, is always our biggest driver in our budget. Those are contractual obligations for the most part. New positions of $1.4 million. The CAO will walk you through those new positions in a moment. And those are not all driving tax levy increases. There's reserves that are funding those, or some user fees that are funding some of those positions as well. Culvert maintenance of about $600,000. This is an emerging pressure that's coming in the public works budget that I'm sure the director will speak to. And then our debt payments are increasing this year by about $400,000. So with that, I'll turn it over to the CAO.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So before I talk a little bit about staffing focus specifically, the director just walked you through some of the general pressures, but predominantly, I really see this as a status quo budget, if I can call it that, but more so, I think, a recovery and reset budget. So we are now 20 months into the pandemic. Revenues still remain a little bit lower than normal and traditional. We're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of recovery. On the expenditure side, we've been very prudent at minimizing expenditure. But having said that, we've had to do it very almost creatively, I'll say, or we have to be very agile in terms of how we're responding and delivering the various services. I'm quite proud of the organization and council. We've been able to maintain that fundamental base level of service. It's not without some sort of hiccups or wrinkles or trying to figure out some workarounds, but I would just say collectively we've accomplished a whole lot in those 20 months. There was a number of questions from council posed, and rightfully so, related to sort of staffing in general, and so I asked the director just to put together so you could see sort of the scope of new positions that we're proposing. That's on the slide that's in front of you. Represents sort of 7 of the 9 operating departments. The 2 that are missing are human services and paramedics. I have provided separate updates to council, particularly on those 2 operating departments with respect to future staffing. We have 100% funding that's coming in. You're going to hear a little bit about that more in subsequent budgets, but we will be adding additional sort of staff in certain areas, Victoria Manor and community paramedics in particular, and that update was provided previously. So this is the long list of positions that we're proposing for 2022. The Q&A, we'll go through them by department, and you're welcome to ask sort of any questions or details. But just in terms of overall, our staffing levels are quite tenuous right now. And I'm sure you're reading or feeling or seeing that. Recruitment is extremely tough in a number of areas, but not just the traditional areas. This is across almost all categories. And so, as I mentioned before, we've had to be a little bit creative. We've redeployed. We've looked at sort of different ways of delivering the core service in general. But we are going to be facing in 2022 some significant recruitment challenges and just trying to get those numbers back to where they should be. We want to do that while respecting collective agreements. So again, I use the term creativity, but we've been working extremely well with all of our bargaining units, and I'm quite pleased of the partnerships with them. We've had some, again, redeployments and shifting of staff. It's less so now in this calendar year. It certainly was very apparent in the 2020 year, but it's not to say that we may not have to shift and move in 2022 as well, so we're readying for that. And then the last I'll just suggest is what is on the slide is really positions that have been, I'll suggest, in the queue for a number of years, or a few years at least. And you know that we've built in a process of developing a business case, looking at staffing versus other ways of delivering the service. And all of these ones have come to the forefront as sort of a need with appropriate justifications, in my opinion. And really to support and move along with that next phase, which is recovery and reset. Last thing I want to just highlight, and I think it's an important distinction, in the budget book itself, in the summary on page 14, it outlines sort of the summary overall of operating budgets. And you'll see on the sort of midway in that on page 14, in 2020, our salary and wages budget was about $61.5 million, excluding benefits and otherwise. In 2021, we reduced that expenditure to $55 million. And so what we're proposing now, as you can see, I used the term recovery. It's going to be slow and steady, but what we're proposing overall for salaries, wages, and benefits, that's inclusive of contractual agreements plus the new positions. We're still about $3.5 million less than our 2020 benchmark that we were proposing. And I just think that's an important distinction. I think we're staying the course in terms of being very prudent with how we're staffing, and we're doing it sort of as best we can, sometimes contractual, short term, so we can monitor and review it. In other cases, it's need and justified. So next slide, please. Then talks about, and you saw this through our presentation to the public. And again, I think it's worth mentioning a second time that, we hear often that we're staff heavy, big bureaucracies and this type of thing. We certainly are a big organization, there's no doubt about it. But I think we can be proud that the percentage of staff to overall budget remains with our comparators. We're a leader in that space. And I remember doing this presentation in my first year as a CAO, so a little 6 years ago, and we were hovering at about the 40% mark. And so you can see where that is sort of shifting and moving in a downwards trajectory in terms of our costs. So next slide, please. And I think I'll just turn it back over just to the director to conclude on the operating budget before we walk through the pages.
Thank you. So, as you know, the operating budget as it sits in front of you includes a 3% tax levy increase. And then with the 2022 approved capital budget that we discussed last Tuesday, we're now sitting at a proposed tax levy increase, all-inclusive, of 4.7%, and that includes the 1.5% dedicated roads capital levy that this council introduced. And so with that adjustment to the capital budget, this is what our total budget's currently looking like, almost $300 million, with obviously the operating budget being the biggest portion, and then the property tax supported capital budget, special projects budget, and the 2 water and wastewater budgets now being approved.
Thank you. So any questions on the presentation? And I'll just ask you to keep in mind that our plan here is to go through each department. Each director is going to give us an overview of their department. We're going to follow along in the pages of the budget book. So, you know, any questions that might come up regarding a certain issue, probably better dealt with with the director at that area. But based on the presentation, are there any questions on that? Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, and just a general question on new hires. And I know not all the new hires are management positions, but when I see words like in the municipal law enforcement, we're hiring a supervisor position, so what's the rationale between hiring a supervisor position instead of hiring 1.5 FTEs in the enforcement position where they're short? So we always hearing that they're short-handed, but we're not hiring an extra officer and a half, we're hiring another supervisor. So I did some rationale on hiring supervisory positions, even in the parks crew leader. Like you're hiring a crew leader, why are we hiring a crew leader when we can bump somebody up to crew leader and put that money towards 2 ground level workers to get more work done? So it's a general question, and why always hire, why hire at the top when we can fill in more positions on the bottom?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So probably multiple responses to that, but I'm glad you asked the question. And I probably should have highlighted it when we paused. I had some notes related to it. So I guess number one, I want to just reiterate that from a management supervisory perspective, Kawartha Lakes is very lean and mean, if I could say it that way. So, you know, we have a staff complement at peak of about 1,200 staff, varies sort of within seasons and various functions. Our entire non-union staff is just slightly over 100 staff, so a 1 to 12 ratio. When you start to then look at supervisory positions within that, it's about half. So we have about 50, what I'll term supervisors, senior leaders for 1,200 staff. So about less than a 5% complement. That's extremely low. You know, if you, based on sort of industry standards, and when you start to look at ratios, a normal, you know, it'd be suggested anywhere from a 1 to 8, 1 to 12 type sort of span where you need supervisory staff or leadership for general staff. So that's just a general comment, and I think we want to make sure that we're still working within that. So that would be the first. I think the second is, there are a couple of leadership positions proposed for this year. You mentioned them. There's 2. Our staff complement for, I'll start with MLEL. The complement hasn't changed in terms of the number of officers. It's recruiting and filling those positions. So there are already, in my opinion, a good number of officer positions that are funded in the budget. The problem is now we have to fill them. And that's why we're down about 3 currently. But throughout the pandemic, it's not unique to MLEL either, but we're seeing, you know, 10 to 20% coming and going at different times in certain service areas. This particular position, I want to now put aside sort of the business case. It really is based on need, and it has been sort of in the planning for a couple of years. We need to have a focus on our bylaws, on some sort of oversight and leadership, on moving forward, almost going to the point of, can we accomplish some internal sort of studies, reviews, and items? It would be a position like this that would drive that through. We're expanding licensing as well. And right now, quite frankly, we have a single non-union position for the entire division as a complement. So that's why it would be proposed here. It's not to say that, you know, in some of the other positions, for example, very much the need would be for, I'll deem it frontline staff or other staff that are simply doing the function that's required. So hopefully that answers that. In terms of the park supervisor, I think similarly, we did a shift and looked at sort of the span of control for the small amount of supervisors and managers in that department, and determined that based on sort of the program streams, and the director can go through it with you later, but that there was a big gap in that particular area needing a supervisory position to sort of manage and support the different teams that are functioning in that area.
No, that's a great answer. It brings it to context when you understand the lack of being able to fill the positions underneath that. It's good information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I read through the summaries and the answers, a lot of the reasons why we're hiring more people is attributed to workload, which I understand. We're really, really busy. And my question is there items that we're really, really busy at that we don't need to do and only concentrate on core functions? Like, if our growth is because, and I'm going to use the fire service just as an example. Their core function for me is fighting fires, obviously, ensuring that businesses and homes are operating their businesses and homes within the current legislation. And very much of the other stuff is nice to do stuff. I'm glad they're doing it. But do we need to do all of it? Can we save those productivity hours and reduce the needs? And I'm just picking on that one because that one jumps to mind as far as identifying what I call core functions. I have more difficulty in, say, in your office, identifying what a core function is. But with fire, for me, it's a pretty straightforward answer. Have we looked at that and as a possibility of saving personnel and not having 12 hires this year?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so again, a couple of responses there. So firstly, I would suggest that in the justification sort of for the staffing, or whether we contract out or whether we abandon that service, that is all sort of subject to a review and a business case from the departments. And so I would suggest that we're constantly reviewing sort of the business and then what are the core functions to support that. I'm going to go back to the example that you used then, which is the fire position. And maybe I'll even go back too, because when Councillor Yeo asked the question, that's probably one of the areas where I'm most concerned, if I had to say sort of in terms of exposing a review, where we need support functions through staff. We have a very, very lean management structure at the top. We've got 2 services delivering core function, well over 300 volunteers on one stream, and about 20 plus full-time firefighters on the other stream. And so, although it may appear that something like an administrative role or function is not supporting core service, I would actually argue the opposite. It is really doing those functions that our firefighters or the core service sort of delivery agents don't need to do. So it's managing our training, which is now in-house for over 300. And there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to support that. Even just simple functions like payroll and communications and distributing information to our staff in this particular case. it's really only done by a handful of people behind the scenes. And so that's why that position in particular, as we're bringing training in-house almost entirely and having to track that with all of our various volunteers, we're looking at needing that administrative support. Probably the story is similar. I know that there was specifics within the Q&A, but honestly, for the most part, we're not looking at hiring new staff to expand into new business areas. This is work that either was paused because of the pandemic, or we've had to shift and move around and provide some support, but it's work that needs to be done, core service work that needs to be done, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I thank you for that answer, and I'm not leaning one way or the other right now, but you said work that was paused, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. If we can pause a job because we're busy or because we have a crisis on our hand, if we can pause our job, is it not also possible we can eliminate that particular function at the same time? And, you know, if it's, I don't want to, if it's not as significant a job that we can afford to pause it, can we also not look at just eliminating it? And I guess that's what my question says.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the question. I would almost make the suggestion that we paused last year, sort of looking at it from a pandemic standpoint. That's why I mentioned from a staffing expenditure perspective, we reduced the budget by about $3.5 million from 2020 through 2021. We have to get to that next recovery phase, and we have to start bringing or expanding back on service. So we did have the luxury of pausing some non-core functions. I think we still have a little bit of that, but I would suggest that if we were to leap maybe entirely next year, the list that is in front of you would be probably double if we wanted to get back to pre-pandemic service. And so I really strongly believe that, you know, these particular positions are services that we're either bringing back online, starting to expand upon, or are supporting the core service functions in the first place. We just don't have the luxury of pausing, in my opinion, for another year.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I don't know if you want to talk about it now or when we get to corporate services, but I do have some questions about the hiring of an internal auditor. And I read the answer to the questions, but I still have some concerns.
I think we'll deal with that when we get to that section of the budget. Does that work for you, Director? So if that's okay? We're going to go through it section by section. So presentation-wide, did you have anything you wanted to touch on there? No?
I don't know. It doesn't fall into a particular category or a particular department. It's just on page 14. And I'm sure the question was asked.
We're going to get to that section. Just let's
Okay.
focus on the presentation if that's okay, and then we'll go to page 13 and 14 first, and I know you've got some questions there. So any other questions on the presentation? Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. It's kind of almost a continuation of Councillor Dunn's question, but with the $3.5 million shortfall from the actuals in 2020, do you see one specific area? I know you broad-based the answer, but do you see one specific area that you're probably more concerned? Because we're not even, I said we're getting back, but we're not back to the 2020 actuals. So I know it's kind of a general question, and it's much like Councillor Yo's too as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question. So I'm not sure I have any sort of department that I would say there's a red flag, if that's sort of a direct response to your question. Obviously, there's some areas that we're monitoring. I mentioned before, I would have, if you asked me a month ago about some of our emergency services, and in particular, we talk about Victoria Manor and paramedics, I would have said, yeah, I have some big concerns in terms of how we're going to recover and what that impact might be. But we were able to leverage grant funding from the province. So I think that problem, I'll say, is predominantly resolved or will be resolved. There's a couple of areas that, we've had sort of chronic vacancies, backfills, so, and you've heard it before, and trying to be competitive, so areas like winter control, operators, those types of positions. In the development services area, we're constantly looking at ways to be creative for the building division. We're looking at benchmarks when our planning staff may need to expand with development, and it's sort of it can be complex, and we've talked to you about that before. There's pre-planning, and then there's the actual sort of processing of development, which we're anticipating in the next few years will start to increase potentially dramatically. So no concerns there yet, but we're looking at sort of strategies to make sure that we maintain service. And I think it does go back probably to Councillor Yo's question, which is in the last 20 months, it's kind of skewed sort of that look because our structure funds sort of what I would suggest is a proper structure. But there are a number of vacancies that we're just competing with every neighbor, municipal, private sector, and otherwise. And so as you can appreciate, that's just been heightened tenfold in the pandemic. So if I had to say anything, my immediate concern would just be to make sure that we're continue to be responsive and maintain that sort of core service level in 2022. But I'm hopeful that we're getting to the next phase of this pandemic and we can start to look at recovery.
Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. Through you to this, Mr. Mayor, to the CAO. You mentioned about restoring full services. Just a question about our services that we offer to the public. When I look at federal government, you can walk into a post office, you can get full services now. At the provincial government, you can walk into Service Ontario and you can receive full services. But our municipal government, some of our service centers are running at 1/3 of the former hours that they were running at. And we're not back to, if we're lucky, we're back to maybe 60, 70%, if that. Like, when do you foresee that we'll be restoring our full services to the public? Because, as I just noted, the examples, the provincial and federal government, they have returned to full services.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, in my opinion, I would suggest that we have returned to full services in one shape or form. I appreciate what you're saying, that they're not operating at the same times as pre-pandemic levels, but all 4 of our service centers are open, for example, just at limited sort of hours. I will be bringing back an update to council in Q1 that looks at sort of our pandemic experience. How has that impacted service levels, and what we could consider, or what council might want to consider as service changes or transformation sort of moving forward in subsequent years. But again, I would say that comment applies across the board. Most of our recreation services, most of our spaces are being rented, certainly with limitations. We haven't fully opened every counter and said, come on into all of our spaces, and that's for very good reason. Sort of balancing sort of what administration is doing versus, quite frankly, what the public demand is right now for that same service. And so I would suggest that we're delivering on all of the services from a core perspective. If there's inconveniences, we're going to be looking at how we can improve on those, and where there's enhancements, I think you're going to be looking at recommendations to make those permanent moving forward when we get into sort of a post-pandemic mode.
Okay, so you're getting a report back, you said, in Q1? Thank you. Okay, any other questions on the presentation? Can I get them all? I've got to keep checking with Councillor Seymour Fagan. If I miss you, Kathleen, just speak up. Don't be shy. I'm going to ask for a motion to receive the 2022 proposed operating budget presentation. Councillor Seymour Fagan, will you move that to receive? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Elmsley. Are there any questions? Further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. So I think what we'll do is we'll go to page 13. There's a couple of questions on 13 and 14, before we get into the actual department overviews and the directors. So maybe we'll go through those first while we have Director Stover here and the CAO. Not that they're going anywhere. But let's do that, and then we'll take a quick stretch for a few minutes, and then we'll dive into our department overviews. So on page 13, and again, I'm going to go through questions and try to cross-reference them. So as we go through this, just ask away if I've missed something. Are there any questions on page 13, which is really the budget summary by revenue and expenses? I know there's a couple of questions on page 14. Councillor Richardson, you had a question regarding corporate services, utilities and fuel decreasing by 93,000. This seems a little off, given that inflation is at an 18-year high. Utility and fuel budgets have been adjusted based on actual expenditures. Although costs are increasing, staff believe there's sufficient budget here for 2022. Are you okay with that answer? Is that, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thank you for the answer. I guess what had me trigger this question was I've just done a comprehensive review of my own business, going through and recognizing how my fuel and utilities have gone through the roof in the last year. And I know that we have to budget differently going into our year coming up. So it was just more of a thing for me that it just triggered looking to make sure we do have sufficient budget for those expenses and those operating pressures.
Did you want to touch on that, Director? I would assume some of it is probably the change in the way we do business as well. Maybe we're not driving as much in certain departments. We're doing more stuff online. So maybe you're seeing the same service being offered, just a reduction in the fuel. But go ahead.
Yeah, through the mayor, this is really a question that's better asked of Director Robinson and Director Shanks. They would have the bulk of the budget for that. But yes, it's likely that some of our buildings are closed, so we can keep those utility costs down. You know, vehicles being less on the road, things like that. But we have looked at the total budget. We've made sure we factored in those cost increases that are coming in, and we still feel we have sufficient budget to manage throughout the year.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have is from Councillor Helmsley regarding contracted services on page 14, increasing by 776,000. Why? Sorry, the one before that, professional fees increasing by 1.3 million in corporate services. So you got an answer there, Councillor Helmsley. Is there any follow-up?
Thank you. And I'm not sure how this fits in, but the answer alludes to changes at Victoria Manor. Now, I understand after the budget was submitted that there were other changes to financing at Victoria Manor, and I'm wondering if that changes the amount that's going to be required.
Caroline, go ahead.
Through you to the councillor, no, that change was put into the current budget that you're looking at right now. The increase or decrease that they indicated, that would come more through revenue rather than expenses.
Thank you. The next question from Councillor Helmsley was regarding contracted services increasing by 776,000. Most of it is in the Public Works. We can ask that again if you want when we get to the Public Works budget. Are you okay? Councillor?
Yes, I just had just another one above that I noted, and it was probably asked in 2021, and I don't remember the answer, but from 2020 to 2021, under staff board training and expense, we went from 591 to 1181, and we're going to 1190, and I don't remember. I'm sure it was asked last year, and I just don't recall the reason why it doubled from 2020 to 2021.
Go ahead.
Through you to the councillor. If you look at 2020, remember we were under a pandemic starting in March, so the expense is low, but I'm assuming if you looked at the budget, it would probably have been around $1 million. No one did any training in 2020, and if we did, it was all through virtual training. We didn't actually physically go to locations, so that reduces the amount of training that could be done. So I would assume that 2020 budget would be close to what your 2021 budget is, okay?
So those are your actuals from 2020 as a result of the pandemic. A lot of those costs came down, so. Yeah, Councillor Ashmore, any other questions on page 14? Okay, page 15. Page 15, any questions on page 15? Seeing none, page 16. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question about the breakdown of 4.1 million in the legal fees. Probably better broken down when we get to the CEO's division under legal in the budget book, if you're okay waiting till then. If I forget, remind me. Any other questions on 16? 17, which is really just a summary. We're going to go through these departments later individually. 18. 19, pretty picture. 20 is corporate items, an overview. There was a question about the gas tax, why it's been reduced by 50%. In 2021, the federal government, as you know, gave us an extra full payment of gas tax just to help with infrastructure. I think they did in 2020 as well, didn't they? So the last 2 years, we've got an extra payment. So that's why you're seeing it going from in 2020, 4.5, in 2021 to 9.3, and then back in 2022 to 4.7 the 1 year. So we're not assuming we would get that again, and if we do, we'll add it to our revenues for next year. But can't budget for that because we know what our gas tax is every year. It's that single payment. So they helped us out pandemic-wise from the federal point of view with the extra gas tax. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. It was just that there were two major announcements last year of gas tax infusion. And I think the second one was really, basically, it was a bonus. Is that what you're referring to?
That's right. In the middle of the year, we received the announcement. We've already got our allocation of the federal gas tax at the beginning of the year for the budget. And then we got an announcement they were gonna bonus a full payment again to every municipality, and that's what that is. So that's what was brought forward in this year's budget. But we're only budgeting for the single source of federal gas tax for this year.
So normally it's only 4.5 million?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councillor Elmsley?
Yeah, I think you jumped over one. I had a question on the percentage of reduction applied to increased population, and I'm happy with that answer. But the second part of that, I think either I messed up when I sent the question in or something happened. Anyway, the second part of that question actually pertained to the 1.5% levy for the capital budget. And the question was, will the 1.5% be used in the year it's collected, or will it go into reserves? So I don't know. We've already passed the capital budget, but just out of curiosity, if you had an answer to that.
Go ahead.
The 1.5% that we had for the dedicated roads capital levy was included in the capital program for 2022 and fully exhausted.
Okay. 2021, any questions there? Just a bit of an explanation. 24, 23, 24, 25, and under 26. Councillor Dunn, you had a question about the 10,000 charges. Just looks like a different line item. Is that answer? Did that clear it up for you?
Yeah, but it does bring up a new one. So what's the $10,000 financial charges? So the line above it, they've incorporated in the debenture principal, they've incorporated the actual cost of the loan as well, which I thought was the $10,000 below, and that didn't make any sense. So now what my question is, what's the $10,000?
I think that's a Caroline question. The financing charges on that line on page 26, debt, lease, and financial. What's the 10,000?
Through you to the councillor, I'm just actually running a report here to see if I can find out what it was. It's actually bank service charges. The bank used to be, they used to charge us only for our bank uploads for taxes, and the payroll goes through an electronic download to everyone as well. But now that they're charging us a fee of $800 a month, and that's all we get charged. So that's the $10,000.
Yeah, that's fine. Maybe in future books, we can call the line above it principal and interest, and the financial charges, to call that a service charge, and then it'll be very clear as to what they are. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions on that page? Page 27. Okay, so what we'll do is let's take 10 minutes to stretch. It's 10:20. Let's come back at 10:30, and we'll start into the different departments and an overview from each director. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order, 10:31. First department is mayor and council. I guess that's me. Mayor and council, any questions? We had a question, quickly, I know, Ron, you're going to go over the CAOs, but there was a question on mileage for council training and mileage from Councillor Dunn on page 30. It is considerably lower as an actual in 2020, which we budget about 30,000 a year, which has been the traditional use, but because of the pandemic, that use went down. Obviously, in the middle of the year, I'm budgeting for next year, not knowing the next year the pandemic's still going to be going, so you'll probably see actuals in 2021 lower as well. Any overage in that budget or surplus in that budget just gets rolled over into the general surplus that we've shown the last few years. So I think you're seeing the same thing in council training and development because you're not attending trade shows because they're all being virtual, so that's lower than it was as well. So
Yeah, I've asked that question a series of times.
yeah.
I just assumed that's what it was. I just
Yeah.
want to confirm it. So when I get to those questions, I'm just going to say, fine, I don't have an issue
Yeah,
with them anymore.
no, happy to answer those, and, you know, I guess my other little, take that opportunity for my other little dig at certain counselors who don't get their expenses in on time. It's very, no, I'm not looking at you, Councillor Yo. I won't mention any names, but, you know, when I'm trying to do a budget in July for next year, obviously, and I don't have up-to-date expenses, it's hard to judge where we sit from a year-to-date perspective. So when we're nagging you for those expenses on a month-by-month basis, there's a reason. Any other questions on mayor and council? Yeah, I got Councillor Seymour Fagan first.
Yes, so public relations, what is that?
Public relations is a line item that was created several years ago, Councillor. We use it for several different things. When we have an all-day meeting and we have to bring in lunch, we use it for that. We also do Reese every year for the different legions. There's some different ads, things that we support through some different publications, and they all come through that public relations budget of 10,000. It was down a little bit in 2020, but that was added quite a few years ago, and it's been a fund that we fund some of these miscellaneous expenses, council expenses from.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Helmsley? Asked and answered. Okay. Any other questions for mayor and council? Okay. 30. We'll move over to page 32, Office of the CAO, and I will turn it over to you, sir.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So I'll kick off sort of the first of the 9 operating departments, the CAO's department. And maybe just for clarification as well, I know that there's a number of questions that were posed, so directors, as they're going through their sections, will pause at those pages. So really just encouraging all of council to track through the pages, and we'll walk them through just like you have, or just like the mayor has done with capital and with special projects. So I'm on page 32, which is an overview of the CAO department. And that lists what it's predominantly made up of, which is the Office of the City Clerk, Municipal Law Enforcement and Licensing, Legal Services, Office of Strategy Management, and then General Administration offices as well. Going to the next page, that highlights some of the items that we're focusing or prioritizing through the budget, but through our work plans for 2022. And again, you're going to hear from other departments later. There'll be some bragging about what they accomplished in 21, as well as what we're continuing to do in 2022. I'll just highlight a couple of items from a department standpoint. We've been sort of laser focused on pandemic response. And I don't know, unfortunately, maybe that is going to continue through the winter. And that's through a number of divisions within our department. But the very first bullet talks about leading the pandemic recovery program. And so deliberately sort of using that terminology as the next phase of the pandemic. I'd mentioned before, we are bringing a report, for example, to council, looking at some service recommendations and lessons learned through the pandemic. But it goes, I think, much broader and beyond that. It's sort of getting our overall corporation and administration back to post-pandemic recovery. And again, in looking at that, we want to look at how we're going to reset and do certain services maybe differently moving forward. So that's an ongoing project. Although I've listed it here, quite frankly, it touches every department throughout the city and through a number of staff working teams that we've put together. I don't need to tell you, next year is the election year, and so you'll see in the clerk's budget that is a focus for getting ready for that and then managing that municipal election later next year. One of the ones that I did want to highlight was sort of, it's near the bottom of the listing, but is to continue to lead and facilitate municipal modernization service reviews. And again, I mentioned to you before, even though the city is sort of focused on our core services, we need to keep looking at continuous improvement, looking at how we can innovate, looking at how we can inform budgets year over year. And one of the ways to do that is through some of these larger modernization reviews. Some of them are specific to to the city or city focused. You're going to hear later, for example, the fire service is going through a broad-based modernization review right now. We're also partnering, though, with others. Sometimes it's Eastern Ontario partners, sometimes it's through AMO or otherwise, where they're doing modernization reviews that really influence or impact us as well. Paramedics is a good example of one that we did in Eastern Ontario, and I suspect there'll be some more legwork on that. Another example would be long-term care facilities and operations, and that's an ongoing priority that we're sharing. The last bullet, again, I'll just conclude, but really started with that we're going to continue to lead, facilitate, and support corporate and community pandemic response. Obviously, I'm hoping we're shifting to that recovery and reset phase. On the next page, on page 34, gives a summary of the total staff in the CAO department, and we're proposing a net change of 4. And maybe we'll just flip to the next page. I can explain that a little bit further. So pages 35 and 36 are the organizational chart for the department. The new positions that we're proposing are highlighted. We'll talk about those when we get to the specific groups and areas, but looking at in the legal services area and realty services in particular, a one-year contract position that would be focused on that roads database, title searches, city land searches. That was something that was presented to you, I think, many months ago in terms of looking at a strategy to look at our unopened, unmaintained roads and getting that inventory up to speed. So that's the role of that particular individual. There's an administrative assistant position that is proposed in the clerk's area, and that is a combination of sort of shifting roles and responsibilities while we have some vacancies, both in our reception and in that administrative area of the clerk's department, and the clerk provided a response to the questions, and we can talk about that in that division. I mentioned that the election is happening next year. You have prudently put together a 4-year sort of budget to fund that, and that's a continuous cycle that you're going to see additional expenses in 2022 because it's an election year. All of those expenses, this supervisor position inclusive, is funded from that built reserve over the term. And then lastly, we talked about briefly, can talk about in detail, is a new supervisor position in the municipal law enforcement and licensing area. So just going to page number 37, Mr. Mayor, this is an overall summary of the budget. So this is for the entire department. So we're proposing about a $350,000 increase over 2021. You probably heard my comments previously about staffing, and that was citywide. I would suggest it's similar here. We found that 2020 was really the first full snapshot to see at year end what expenses would be. on a pandemic scenario. We don't know yet how we're trending for 2021, but I think it's going to be similar throughout our operating budgets and departments. And so now this is starting to look at, although it's an increase from 21, typically there's net reductions in those sort of pandemic years. And so we're starting to build back where we need to get back to our core service levels and starting to expand out on service. And so we listed what those sort of pressures or increase to the budget from last year is made up of. And maybe I'll pause there briefly, Mr. Mayor. I noticed that there's a question that was posed by Councillor Elmsley on this page about the election expenses.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. I think it's pretty straightforward. Councillor just wanted to know if the expenses for the 2022 election and the contract position was being paid from the election reserve, and it was confirmed that it is, so I'm getting the nods. He's good to go.
Okay. Okay, then I'll continue on with, so the next page, page 38, is a departmental summary of the budget. By categories, outlines revenue and expenses. We are still proposing a net, I'll say decrease, but starting to rebuild some of the revenues, hopefully post-pandemic, but we saw some minor impacts to that. On the expense side, which is outlined on page 39, the total expenses, again, you'll see that we're predominantly flatlining, a slight decrease from 2021 budget. That's on the bottom line, sort of highlighted in black on page 39. I'll go back one page, page 38. Councillor Dunn asked a question about the land sales budget. And we, as you may recall, this was quite a few years ago, we had done an exercise looking at a 10-year projection of land sales. And we targeted, based on sort of inventory that we knew at the time, that we could accomplish over that 10 years a $6 million revenue target from those sales. What we did then in the first few years is basically divided it up by 10 and said, we'll target 600,000 every year. Now that we've got a few years under our belt, in some years we're getting more than that target. In some years we're getting less than that target. And predominantly, especially during the pandemic, we need to make sure that if we're proactively selling, we want to get it out there, make sure that the properties are well exposed so that we maximize sale revenue. So staff are proposing sort of a modest decrease in the revenue, not modest. They're a modest sales revenue in 2022, but the context of that is really that that's still looked at over the 10-year span, that we're still well on track to accomplish that $6 million target over 10 years, but to be prudent, we wanted to make sure that we highlighted what actuals we're anticipating in 2022 specific. And the response there just notes that a staff report is coming forward. It says December, but it'll actually be coming in the January to council with an update on that overall 10-year program. So I'll pause there, Mr. Mayor.
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with page 38. I'll have some comments on 42 when we get there, but I'm just trying to figure out when to jump in, I guess. Okay.
We go through it as best, but you had another question there about the contracted services. Are you okay with the explanation?
Yes,
okay.
I'm fine with 38. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So then we'll move from, so page 38 and 39 are the overall budget summary for the department. Page 40 then starts to break down the individual divisions within the department. So the first division, that's the org chart, lean and mean for administration. And then the subsequent page 41 is the specific divisional budget. And I didn't see any questions, so again, I'll keep going unless you stop me, Mr. Mayor. Page 42 then now gets into the clerk's office or clerk's division. And that page 42 shows the org chart for that overall division. And again, as I mentioned before, it's proposing a 10-month contract for an election supervisor and an additional administrative assistant position in that pool or in that group in that particular division.
And I think Councillor Dunn has a question for you on that org chart on 42, if we could just pause there for a minute. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not so much a question, and I don't know how you want to handle these, but I actually have a motion. I've read the answer. Now, with the elections officer supervisor, I understand that one, and it has been a good argument. Certainly, we've talked about the MLEL supervisor and the increase in personnel there. I fully understand that. I have no issue supporting it. I kind of like Emmett there, or Councillor Yeo, where I like frontline people, but I understand why it's, in this particular case, it's more important to have a supervisor, because that supervisor will work as well. In this position, I'm not comfortable with it simply because I haven't seen a business case. And as I said, I don't know what format you want to use, but just to establish a format, I'll make a motion that the administrative assistant be removed from the budget, and that we look at a report in January, February, some sort of business case establishing what will happen if in fact we don't have this extra administrative assistant. And because I've seen that for the MLEL. I haven't seen it for the administrative assistant, and I would like to see more meat on the table. So if I get a seconder, anyway, I've already made my argument now. If I get a seconder, I guess I'll make that as a motion, if that's the way you want to deal with it.
Yeah, any extractions or takeaways from the budget we'll deal with now. Anybody that wants to add anything, we'll see if council wants to.
Sure, okay. Then I would make a motion that we eliminate that position from the 2022 budget.
The position of administrative assistant for the clerk's department? Be eliminated in the 2022 budget. Moved by Councillor Dunn, second. Councillor Ashmore, do you want to speak to it?
I pretty much did during my preamble, so I'm quite content letting it go forward for a vote.
Okay, I'm just going to ask the CEO, do you want to comment? I know there was some other issues there, so do you want to comment on that before I've got another question?
Sure. And maybe through, if you wouldn't mind first, just maybe a clarification through you, because I didn't catch, is that a decision unit to address later, or is this on the floor to remove from the budget right now?
It's on the floor to remove from the budget. Any removals from the budget we'll deal with as we go through it. Any additions we'll deal with as decision units later on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. And so apologize if the sort of business case is thin, at least in terms of the response. But again, as I mentioned, sort of in terms of staffing overall, I guess a couple of things. Number one, all of the positions, we're certainly not putting them forward lightly. I would suggest that there's a strong business case for them. In this particular case, we actually have, I mentioned, a pool of administrative staff. We have some shortages and vacancies there. It's sort of, it transcends beyond the administrative pool, if I can say that. It also talks about or looks at our reception area as well here at City Hall, and just in general that function. And so this is proposed to fill that gap where we have shortages, number one. Number two, in the long run, when we start to build back and get to where we need to be, that's where I would suggest the business case is solid in the description. So post-pandemic, we will require that overall administrative support for all of the various functions in the clerk's area. And that's inclusive of council services and, again, just overall City Hall management. So this is not to sort of expand. This would be a need that we need sort of a core group. And I should have also mentioned the other is that with the municipal election, we're obviously redistributing some staff as well, and so the administrative function would help support that gap, if you will, next year too.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, I have a question on the motion, and I also have, I guess, a question on the explanation. We currently have a receptionist, do we not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have a receptionist position. That's one of the areas that throughout the pandemic, we've redeployed staff. And in the current functionality, there remains redeployed staff from our corporate services area. And so this is, again, sort of my comment before about some flexibility in those redeployments and shifting of staff. We would be proposing that some of, or that staff that's currently functioning there could start to return to their home departments. They're not even within the CAO department, and then this would allow for reception duties and the required administration duties.
But historically, we've had a receptionist at the back door. Was that position eliminated, and now you're bringing it back?
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, the incumbent has been redeployed in an accommodation, and since then, we've been redeploying other staff to do that function. Obviously, it's been minimized through the pandemic. We're not having sort of regular public interface, but that function is still there. The incumbent, though, is still employed with the city and has been redeployed to do other administration work in another division.
Yeah, maybe I'm not explaining myself properly. The position of receptionist still exists within your department? That hasn't changed. So you're adding another person on top of the receptionist? Is that what I'm understanding? Okay. The second thing is on the motion, it says bring a report back in January. What will that accomplish? Will we at that time make a decision on whether we're going to hire mid-year? And if it's not in the budget, how does that occur?
The motion I have on the floor is to remove the position from the 2022 operating budget. So that's the motion that's on the floor.
Thank you.
Councillor Richardson?
I guess that's where my confusion lied too. I was saying the conversation regarding a report back at Q1. I recognize a lot of these positions that are being asked today is a lot to do with that we are growing, and I think you're looking at these as building block positions because we are growing. So I'm in support of this position.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I'll ask Councillor Dunn to sum up. I too am not, I'll come back to you. I'm not gonna support the motion either. I think, I think over the past few years, since I've been here, I'm gonna say this CAO has been nothing but prudent with our staffing requests. You see our charts, we're one of the lowest in the province and comparable municipalities. We are growing as a municipality. There's no history of hiring without the rationale in place to do it. And you know what? If the CAO is bringing forward, a need for this administrative assistant position, then in my opinion, as we grow as a municipality, we're still below where we were in 2020 from a costing salary perspective. And they've done a great job at moving people around and shifting to try and maintain some of our services. And there's going to have to be a little bit of a leap of faith here at some point as we get back to some kind of normal and meet those demands. And I'm very confident that this is a need that wouldn't have been brought forward unless it was needed. So I'm not going to support the motion, but I'll ask you to sum up. Go ahead.
And my recommendation to remove it isn't based on the fact that I don't believe our CAO is prudent. My recommendation is we're shifting people around, but we're keeping positions. And when we bring everybody back to where they belong to be, whether we leave our accommodated receptionist in her current position and fill the receptionist position and all those other positions that are currently vacant, that's the question I've got. At that point, do we still need the administrative assistant? If we filled all the gaps we currently have, do we still have a gap? And I don't see anything in the written response or hear anything in the verbal response, quite frankly, that indicates that it's a necessity, that it's an urgent fill. And that's the only reason. And I've got a whole bunch of these that I want to talk about. But if we've got gaps because we adjusted and shift people around, let's put them back where they belong and then see if we still have gaps. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Everybody clear on the motion? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. Councillor Seymour Fagan, motion fails. Okay. You had another question on page 42 about the election supervisor, or did you get the response you were okay with that?
I'm fine with the election supervisor.
Thank you. Then I'll ask the CAO to move on from there. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so through you, so I was on page 44, which talks about the clerk's division and municipal law enforcement in particular. So on 44 is the org chart. Just want to make sure I didn't miss.
Another question, Councillor Dunn.
Sorry.
You had a question about the supervisor for municipal law enforcement. Are you okay with the response and the justification for that one?
I'm fine with the rationale provided, yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, apologize. Page behind. You guys are too quick. I can't keep up with your pace. So page 44, again, talks about the supervisor. We just answered that question. Page 45 then summarizes the municipal law enforcement budget itself. Page number 46 is then the legal division. This is the overall org chart, and I spoke to the position that was already proposed as a contract for that roads database, title searches specific to a business case that was brought previously through to council. Now, before I move on this one, though, Mr. Mayor, I understood there was also a question, I think Councillor Ashmore asked in the opening part about legal expenses, and this was the page that, or the area to respond to that.
Yeah, on 47. Let me just go back to Councillor Dunn had a question first, and then we'll go to deal with Councillor Ashmore.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with a contract for 1 year for a specific job, but I do have a worry because I've watched the city, and in every government I've ever dealt with, what starts off as a 1-year contract grows into a full-time job after the end of one contract. So I do throw that caution out there, and if I'm still here in 2022, I'll address it again. Thank you.
Thanks. Make a note of that, CAO. So then, Councillor Ashmore, you had a question at the beginning about legal expenses. What is the breakdown of the 4.1 million in legal fees? So that is pretty much page 47. So if that gives you what you're looking for, if you have any follow-up, I'll just ask you to direct it to the CAO.
Yeah, thank you to the CAO. A couple of questions. When I look at the line rents and insurance expenses, we moved from leasing in a building in Lindsay, Peel Street, to bring it in-house here at the City Hall. But our rents are the same. They're $3 million. In fact, they're even more. That's my first question. Why are we paying $3 million? I know insurance expenses are part of it, but it looks like it's actually costing us more to bring it back in-house here. The idea was to cut costs when we amalgamated everybody under one roof, and we would bring them back here to City Hall, the legal department.
So through you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, and maybe it's a bit misleading with the rents and insurance expenses sort of title, but that line item that you're talking about, the $3 million budgeted in 2022, predominantly is made up of insurance premiums and expenditure as part of that office or division within legal. In terms of the rents, great question in terms of what that is actually sort of drilling down to. It's not rent that we're paying to support particular spaces. I think at one point we had listed it that way because a portion of the legal division was in Peel Street, and so we attributed a portion of the rent as we did with Public Works and Engineering when they were housed at the Peel Street building. So it was an expenditure that was shared accordingly. Very small amount. We only had about 2 or 3 staff, I think, at that time. I would suggest that the majority of this is entirely on the insurance expenditure side, that they're not paying any subsequent rents because they are under one roof now. So we probably could drop the rents portion of that title and really just call it insurance expenses for clarity.
Okay, thanks. And the last question was, when we hired a solicitor in City Kawartha Lakes many years ago, the idea was for that one solicitor to do most of the work, but how much are we outsourcing legal now? It looks like a lot of the work is being outsourced, and I know there's special areas of law, I understand that, but it seems that seems to be growing, and it's getting more expensive the more we farm it out. Are we getting a handle on that, or is our solicitor trying to keep most things in-house?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I get a couple of comments. So firstly, we still maintain a single solicitor. I know when the business case was brought forward, and we have continued to sort of monitor that and what we can manage in-house. I'm glad you exposed it because, again, we also need to look at external contracted services. And that's a combination of third-party contract, actual legal providers, and also sort of legal settlements or payouts. So that budget really covers both of those items. So you're seeing a line item for predominantly contracted services of $670,000. So that's a combination of those sort of settlements as well as using the third-party legal for various functions that we have. We're probably, we would be starting to look at a tipping point where if we wanted to pull back in-house, there certainly would be a business case to be made. I'm not sure how much that would sort of save on the contracted side, obviously some. But at some point, I think we're going to find that our current structure is going to need some other sort of legal professional in-house. Right now, our solicitor sort of covers all of our legal issues and actually has oversight and gives direction as well for those third parties. So we haven't done a sort of up-to-date business case, but I know that when we've been looking at the structure each year, and it is reflective in the contracted services, there is going to be a tipping point where we may need to start looking at the business case for internal services. But as of right now, we continue to operate with a single solicitor and contracted services where it makes sense.
Okay, Councillor Elmsley.
Just a point, Mr. Mayor, that on rents and insurance expense, it went down from the actual in 2020 by some, $600,000 to the budget for 2021. So there obviously was some adjustment made for something.
That would have been the tender for the new insurance, wouldn't it? That came in over $700,000 at the number I seem to remember. That would have been the transition there when we went out for tender. Thank you. Any other questions on legal or for the CAO, really, before we move on to community services? Go ahead.
Would it be okay, I don't need it right now, but just to get a breakdown of what that $3 million is? Like, how much is rent and how much is insurance expenses? I don't need it right now, but if we could.
Yeah, can we get a, Caroline, go ahead.
Through you to the councillor. Actually, the only rent in there is equipment rental. Unfortunately, some of these captions that you have for these expenses work for some areas, and then you'll see something where there's actual rent paid, and you'll see that in the same area. But the rest of that, only 1,750 is equipment rental, and the rest is insurance.
There you go. You don't need it now, but you're getting it now. Pretty efficient, eh? Thank you. Any other questions for the CAO or any of his departments before we move on to community services? Okay. We'll ask Director Shanks to join us. There he is. Welcome, Director. Starting on page 48, I'll ask you to walk us through your department and the pages, if you would, and there's a few questions related to your, if you can tie the questions in, but if not, I might interrupt you before you move on to the next page. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and hello, council, and the other staff that are present there. And by all means, with me not being in the council chambers, it might be difficult to see when there are questions or a need to pause. So please just speak up, because I won't be able to keep up with what's going on there necessarily through Zoom. So on the first page, just the departmental overview. So it just gives a brief overview again as what the Community Services Department does, similar to every year. So there's the Community Services Administration and the Courier Services that's provided internally within the city. We've got the Building and Property Division, which looks after all of our administrative facilities and library facilities. Our Customer Service Division, which looks after the staff operating our service centers, our municipal call center, and implementing customer service standards. And then we've got our Parks and Recreation Division, which looks under the vast various programming within that specific area, whether it be arenas, community centers, pools, parks, trails, all the programs and some funding opportunities within them. And cemeteries falls within that, while it has a separate budget item for it. If we move on to the next page, it lists some budget priorities that we have within the Community Services Department. Obviously, one of our major focuses is implementing the capital plan, which council approves. I believe the 2022 capital budget has 67 individual community services capital projects. So it's a fairly large portfolio that the staff will manage and implement throughout the year. And some of those major capital projects are some of the significant focus. Obviously, the continuation and completion of both the Bobcaygeon Beach Park as well as the City Hall HVAC systems are two of the main programs that we will be wrapping up in the 2022 calendar year. As well, through the budget process, I know the council recently approved moving forward with the Cobeconk Wellness Center, which staff will be assisting with the Cobeconk, Norland and Area District Chamber of Commerce on moving forward with that one. As well, of special note is you just approved the special projects budget, and within it you would have seen a $75,000 project line for an energy management plan. The city has one right now. It's a 5-year plan which is legislated, and that expires this year. So there is a need to put forward a new energy management plan beginning next year, and that's what some of the staff focus within Building and Property will be on. Some of the other budget priorities are listed there. The last one is reintroduction of service levels impacted by COVID-19 and the current pandemic. And I would be remiss not to state that, and I know all departments across the city and the public have been drastically impacted by the pandemic. But community services is an area where we have sort of moved back to providing services direct to the public, simply because of the style of service that it is. So whether it's clients at our service centers, whether it's aquatics programs, fitness programs, arena programs, obviously that takes place with the public being within the facility. And I cannot say enough about the congratulations I would like to give to the Community Services Department staff for how they've been able to provide those service, the juggling act that's been because of provincial protocols and policies that continue to change. And I do not think that that's over. I think we all recognize that moving into 2022, that will continue to be a bit of a challenge with some ever-changing protocols and policies for how services can be provided. So a huge kudos to the community services staff for being able to manage as they have. The next page talks about our personnel breakdown. And I do believe that Councillor Dunn had a question that was we tried to provide an answer to previously. It relates to the Parks crew leader increases within the Parks and Recreation division specifically. And I know that Councillor Yeo spoke about those specific positions. Just for the information, so those are not management non-union positions. They are in fact union positions. There is a bit of a hybrid to them in that they do provide some support to our non-union supervisors, but they also are capable and do provide some labor style specific tasks throughout the area. They're very integral to us being able to move forward, and we have been able to offset some of the costing associated with them through the reduction or really the transfer of seasonal position into the full-time crew leader positions. From a span of control perspective, I know that the CAO spoke about it earlier. So we have roughly 200 staff within community services at the various level, whether it be full-time, seasonal, part-time, or students. That equates to roughly 115 full-time equivalency. Of that, only 13 are non-union management level positions, and that would be at the supervisor, manager, director, and executive assistant role. So again, our span of control is quite wide, and by providing these parks crew leader positions, it does provide some assistance to our north and south area parks and rec supervisors specifically. So I guess I'll stop there, Mr. Mayor, just because I know there was a question relating to that, and I've gone through 3 or 4 pages just to see if there's any further questions of council.
Go ahead, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm comfortable with the director's explanation of moving into a supervisory position. That makes sense to me. What just drives me nuts is how many people is 0.01 people? I just had to ask that question.
Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I'm not so sure I can give a specific answer to that. That might be more of a, I don't want to put Director Stover in the hot spot for answering what a 0.01 is. Basically what it equates to is the total number of hours that are worked. So a full-time equivalency, for example, again, depending on whether it's 35 or 40 hours or 37.5 hours per week, is roughly between 1,800 and 2,100 hours per year. So if a staff member is working 100 hours, then there's a percentage based on that, and that's how you can get to a 0.12 or a 0.9 or a 0.01, whatever it might be. So I'll see if Director Stover wants to correct me or add to that, and be quiet for a minute.
Through the mayor, so on the assumption that a full-time staff would work a 40-hour work week, a 0.1 works out to about 208 hours of part-time staff.
So a 0.01 is about 20 hours. Because it's a 0.01. If it had been a 0.1, I'd understand that, but a 0.01, I thought, boy, that's really cutting it close.
I think we'll all agree to round it up to, or round it down to 1 and go and move on. So I think we're good. Any other questions on that section for Director? Okay, go ahead, Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Stover, for that. The next pages are the overall department organizational chart, and then it flows into the, it continues on. It's such a wide, large area of staffing within community services that it does take 2 pages. and the page 52 shows highlighted the changes through the parks crew leader and the seasonal parks position. So I think I've just discussed that. So we don't need to continue on that end. As we move forward through the next page, page 53 in the budget book, it talks about the overview within the departmental budget. You will see a reduced community services capital budget that was previously approved. Some of the specific notes here that I'll mention outside of what's, or might even be mentioned here within the writing, but I believe there's about $830,000 of a general increase to the community services budget. And I know that Director Stover talked about the special projects budget, and I will speak to them a little bit later on in the budget book. 560,000 of that 830,000 increase is a direct relation to special projects. So as the director previously mentioned, that's not an increase to the budget. It's really just a transferring of the special budget from what was the capital budget area into the operational budget. So it's not an increase in any way to the overall budget. And I will try to speak to some of the other items both on this page as well as within the budget as we move forward. So if we move into the general overview budget, which is page 54 of the community services budget, a few quick things to mention there. You will see that the registration fees are down by 54,000 from the previous year. I can just advise that a majority of that is for pool related. And it's predominantly as it relates to truly right-sizing the budget from what previous years have shown from a revenue generation within that area. You will see that there is an actual increase of 33,000 in the Parks and Rec rental fees. And that is, I need to be very clear on this, that is with the anticipation and hope that 2022 moves back to pre-COVID use of some of our facilities. So in the event that the pandemic takes a different turn again, or we do not move back to what we're projecting and hopeful of pre-pandemic scenarios, there will be a potential that we do not reach those revenues. But that is based on a hope that we can move back to pre-pandemic. The next big item on that page 54, you'll see that within the expenses areas, the salaries, wages, and benefits, between the two of them, they're up by about 159,000. That's pretty much the cost of the two crew leaders, including the offset from the last seasonal, as well as the various increases that are expected in 2022 through the various agreements out there, whether it be union collective agreements or the non-union salary scales. So with that, I think I'll stop there, Mr. Mayor, before I move on to any further pages to see if there's any. Oh no, I'll finish the next page as well, if you don't mind, because that's the balance of the overall community services budget. I do know that there was a question earlier that was asked by one of the councillors about utilities and fuels. I think it was Councillor Richardson about the reduction overall from city. I believe it was about 95,000. You will see that 101, roughly 102,000 of that is within the community services standpoint. A variety of reasons for that. We have changed services and how they're offered through facilities that are available. So 12 Peel Street, I know Councillor Ashmore talked about that. We're no longer paying any utilities for that facility, so there's a reduction there. The Ops Community Center is no longer being used as an arena facility. So while there's still utilities associated with it, certainly they are lower because there's no ice in it. So that's caused for that to be lower. Services have changed in some of our communities through natural gas. So that's lowered both our hydro costs as well as furnace oil costs at some facilities and some locations. And then there's just been a further right sizing once again of some of our facilities as we move forward. And that's what equates to that 102,000, which I think is the explanation for that previous question that Councillor Richardson has in the overall corporate overview budget. On that page, I believe that it was Councillor Elmsley had a specific question about the community services contract, $379,000 increase. Again, that goes to that special project line item that Director Stover and myself have both spoken about previously. That's where the Parks and Recreation specific special projects, that's the line item that they show. So while it's an increase to the operating budget, it's not an increase to the overall budget. It's a transfer from capital. Made up in that 379,000, council will remember projects such as, I think there's 100,000 for trails maintenance. There's 50,000 for various tree work. I think there's 25,000 for fencing requirements at our parks and cemeteries. So those are some of the ideas that make up that. The line item below that, while it wasn't specifically questioned in the questions posed by council, the building maintenance up by 156,000. That's where the building and property specific special projects roll in. And there's 4 within that area, and that makes up that entire figure as well. So really those 2 line items, the 550,000 roughly within there, that's special projects. And the last item on this page that I'll speak about specifically, unless there's any further questions, I know that Councillor Ashmore talked about building rental and 12 Peel Street and the moving of the legal team out of that facility and to the CAO's comments about, in fact, we've moved everybody out. That $80,000 reduction is a specific reduction based on no longer having to pay rent for the 12 Peel Street facility. And with that, before we move any further, Mr. Mayor, I'll see if there is any further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, your question was answered. Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Director Shanks. On page 54, when we see from 2020 to 2021, our wages, salaries, and benefits go up from 4.6 to 6.2, did we not hire some students this year? Because they do a great job and they're not as expensive as full-time employees that we have. So I had thought that this may have gone down a bit, but just wondering why we went up so much in our wages and benefits for 2021.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So the 2020 figure that you're looking at is the actual figure, and you are correct. Certainly, the full reason for the reduction in that is not due to students, but it is students make up for it. There was a number of positions within the city that we either did not recruit for throughout the main pandemic portion, which was during 2020, or people that were positions that were vacant and were not filled at the time because how services were being provided, or the fact that some services were not being provided. So that $4.6 million in salaries and wages in 2020 is lower than what the budgeted amount was directly as a result of the pandemic. So it's kind of a false number. And that's why you'll see the 2021 budget being back up to the 6.2 and the budget in 2022 being just a small increase based on the rationale that I previously provided, I would think. And again, Director Stover may want to talk to it more from an HR perspective, but I would imagine that some other departments that faced similar realities in their 2020 staffing levels have similar figures where the 2020 number is showing lower than what was budgeted for previous years.
Director, do you foresee the 2021 actuals being lower than the budgeted amount as well as a result of not being back up to full capacity this year? Do you foresee that in the coming reconciliation at the end?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, I do believe that that would be the case. I know that there are still a number of positions, not to the same degree as in 2020, but there are still a number of positions within community services that are vacant or have staff on leave or we didn't necessarily fill. So definitely moving into the 2022 year, I'm certainly hopeful that we get back onto what was the more standard figures from a staffing complement.
Thank you. Any other questions for Director Shanks up to page 55? If not, we'll move on. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. In the next page is the Community Services Administration org chart. So that is directly myself, as well as Leanne Donnelly is the executive administrative assistant, and our courier position. And then the next page being page 57, which is the budget for it. Very few changes in that. And there, I know there was no previous questions. So I'll move on to the next page, which is page 58 within the budget book, which is the organizational chart for Parks and Recreation. Again, you'll see the two positions being highlighted, which we spoke to in the earlier slide when it was showing the overall departmental overview. So again, I'm not going to speak to them because I believe that we already have. If I continue moving forward then on to page 59, which is then the Parks and Recreation Division specific budget. I know that Councillor Dunn asked the question both on this page as well as in a future page as it related to building and property about is the budget returning to 2019 norms. And what I would suggest is that for the most part, it is. Again, as I said earlier, when we talked about the overall department budget, we are very hopeful that 2022 moves back to the pre-COVID registration rental revenue lines. So there is some hope and some projecting on that. And if that does not come to be, there is a potential that we will not meet with that. As I provided in my answer, there is also some changes that the city has seen since 2019 in relation to the budget, and that's because some facilities are either no longer operating as city facilities, or some facilities have changed in their operation. So the Ops Community Center, a prime example, that obviously the budget won't be the same because the revenues generated in that facility are really no more based on the fact that there is no ice in there. So there's a significant change to the norms from what they were, but to that question, from a standpoint of what services we are providing, yes, the projected budget is moving back to what the pre-19 pre-COVID norms were. To this specific line item, this specific budget, two things I'll key on. So you'll see the salaries, wages, and benefits increase of $243,000. Again, a big portion of that is the previous talked about the $151,000 increase between salaries and benefits for the new positions and collective agreements and salary structure increases that we expect. The balance of this, so the other $100,000 shown there, when we move into the cemeteries area, you'll see that the salaries and wages is down by a similar number. So it's really the staff members are just being shown in different areas between cemeteries and Parks and Rec. So there's no increase or decrease. It's just an offset from one area to the other. The other item I'll show here is the contracted services being up $513,000. Again, $379,000 of that was answered previously and is the special projects related to this specific area. So with that being said, I'll see if there's any further questions on Parks and Rec specific areas, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anything Parks and Recs or cemeteries. I think you've sort of covered that one as well, probably. Any questions from council on 59 or 60? Seeing none, Director, go ahead.
Thank you. So then if we move into the next page, which is 61, which hasn't been covered, that's the org chart for customer service. So again, we have a manager of customer service. That position has been filled. Again, Leanne Donnelly has been doing double duties as the EA for customer service as well. So we are moving forward. There's a posting right now out for the hiring permanently of the manager position. And then you'll see the SA3s, SA2s, and SA1s, which makes up the balance of those positions. They are the staff that man our service centers and provide that public to the service, as well as are responsible for our call centers. And one thing before I move off of this page, I did not highlight the manager of our Parks and Rec division, so I apologize. Jen Johnson is the manager of that division. I'm sure all of you are aware of that, and it's a very large division, so I should have mentioned her as well, and I apologize. Within the budget specific, For community services that you find on page 62, again, there was no specific questions in the question period, and there's no real major changes within the budget. But before I move into the building and property, Mr. Mayor, I'll stop and see if there is any that anybody has.
No, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So on to page 63. That's the spreadsheet for our building and property. The manager is Jorg Peterson, and you will see there's no change to the proposed org chart moving forward for 2022 as we move into the budget on page 64. Again, the two major differences you will see is the contracted services being up by 232,000, and that's predominantly where the special projects rolls up within the building and property area. The rents down by 80,000, which I spoke to earlier, is the decrease in the rent for the 12 Peel Street division. The only other one then that I will highlight here is the $117,000 decrease in materials and supplies. Again, that goes to predominantly Councillor Richardson's talk earlier about utilities, and that's where we've seen some of the significant reduction in hydro, heating oil, and telephone services within the building and property specific area. And I think that ends the overall community services budget. But I'll see if there is any final questions from your end, Mr. Mayor.
No, Councillor Dunn had a question on 64, but I think he's had that answered, so thank you. Any questions on any of that for Director Shanks before I think he's going to touch on libraries with us, but anything from community services? Seeing nothing? Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but now you're putting me on the spot because I was not prepared to speak to libraries. I believe, if I remember correctly, that the library board and the CEO of the libraries made a previous presentation to council on their proposed 2022 budget previously. So I'm not going to add too much to it from what they've said before. Obviously, they are in the midst of moving back to normal services at our various library facilities. They have obviously seen a major impact on the services that they provide, how they provide them, and the fact that they are once again working directly with the public at our library branches that are out there. So again, full kudos to Mr. Anderson and his team for how they're doing that. I know that they have a new strategic plan that the board did adopt previously, and they are moving forward with some of that. And two of the main projects within it are the Bob Cajun Library expansion and relocation, and the Fenelon Falls Library expansion and relocation, still within the same building. And both of those projects, the Bob Cajun one is out to tender, or it's closed now, and council will be seeing a report at the council meeting next week on it and moving it forward, hopefully. And the Fenelon Falls Library expansion into the now vacant Adult Education Center in the same building directly adjacent to the current library branch. Council previously approved just a few weeks ago the capital budget for that to take place in the 2022 calendar year as well. You will see that on page 67, they have no changes to their personnel breakdown, so therefore there's no changes to page 68 being their org charts either. And just looking very quickly at the balance of their budget, I think it's relatively straightforward with what is being projected for 2022. I believe they may have touched base on some of these previously when they presented to council, and maybe if needed, Director Taylor, if I'm missing, or CAO Taylor might have something to add if there's something that I've missed.
No, I'd say you recovered quite well for being caught off guard. Any questions for the director on the library portion of the budget? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. Through you to Director Shanks. My question is with the Omimi Library. The current building, which is a great building, it's for sale, and I just wanted to sort of assure people that how long is our lease for that building? And we don't want to move, but what is the update on that? Because the building is for sale at present.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, if I remember correctly, the original lease that we entered into was a 5-year lease. which means that it is due to expire near the beginning of 2023, if I recall, if my math is correct. So it is something that the library board will be looking at with both myself and our realty services division as we move forward. Right now, there's no projected plans to change locations for that library service. So I'm sure we'll be talking with the current owner or potential new owner as we move forward. What I will suggest to you, and what's been discussed previously, both at the council level as well as through our arena feasibility plan, is that when we get to, if we get to a point of building a replacement Emily Omimi Community Center arena in the downtown Omimi area, that construction would take place to provide multi-service delivery, and we would look at the potential to moving the library into that facility at that time. But that is certainly nothing planned for within the next year plan. So it's certainly a next 10-year plan. So it's a future years projection. So I would suggest to you that extending the current lease, if the current and potential new owners of the library, Omimi Library Branch location, are open to it, that's something that we would be bringing forward to council at the appropriate time.
Be good, because I think that folks there would like to carry on with the present location. It's in a great location, and it'd be a shame we'd have to uproot again. So it was opened up a few years ago, and it's really a positive move, and it's a great location and great services. And it'd be sad if we had to move. And hopefully the library board can get in touch with the new owners.
I would think the attraction of the building being for sale is that they have the city as a tenant. So I think that would probably be, I would assume a new owner would want to continue with a full building, but so I'm sure they'll keep you posted. Any other questions on library before we move on? Seeing none, thank you, Director, appreciate that. And we're going to go on to page 72, which is corporate services. And our very own director's in the house, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Latham. So if you turn to page 72, we have the department overview for corporate services. There's 5 divisions within the department, as you're aware. Treasury, which is led by our treasurer, Carolyn Danes. Human Resources is led by Leanna Patterson. Our Information Technology Group, led by Carrie Clavin. Revenue and Taxation, led by Linda Liotti. And our Communications, Advertising, and Marketing Division, led by Sherry Davidson. If we turn to page 73, the top of the page, some of our priorities for this year. We undertook to develop a new HR strategy, which we're referring to as our people strategy. That'll guide the strategic direction of our HR department. That's in the process of being finalized, so we'll look to start implementing some of the initiatives within that. We're going to introduce a new water meter replacement program, and that's really looking to start switching out some of our old water meters that are likely not functioning properly, and we're losing revenue as a result of that. The city's been working on an electronic document records management system for a couple of years now. We took a bit of a pause through 2020 with the pandemic, but we're looking to have that project finalized, I believe, by the end of Q1 of 2022. And then, obviously, the long-term financial plan. We've been in front of council a number of times on that, and we'll look to have that finalized early in 2022 as well. And then the fiscal resource management, so effectively looking at our debt strategies and our cash management practices. It's another initiative we want to look at in 2022. There is one new position being requested for 2022, and that's an internal auditor. We did have a question from we just talked about almost a $300 million budget. And we have 2 accountants on staff. It's Carolyn and myself. And so what we're finding is that while we have some good processes in place, Carolyn and I just don't have the opportunity to be revisiting those processes. And I'm talking about internal controls, making sure that our cash handling practices are proper, making sure that our revenues are being audited accordingly, our expenses, our procurements, all of those sorts of oversight of all of those policies and procedures. Carolyn and I just don't have the time or capacity to take that on. Not surprising to council, we've had some fraud situations. That's not really driving the need for this position, but it's highlighted the fact that those frauds likely wouldn't have occurred if we had proper oversight of some of our policies and processes. And so we do have external auditors that review our books every year. But to give you order of magnitude, their idea of materiality, what's important for them to look at, is anything over $1.2 million. So when they're not looking in the deep weeds of, are our procurements happening properly, or are our cash handling processes correct, they're looking at generally accepted accounting principles, and are we managing those? So that's really what's driving the need for this, is really we want to be able to have ongoing internal audits happening to make sure that our processes and practices are correct from an accounting perspective, that internal controls are there. We would see this position helping other departments in looking at, if they want to look at having an in-house versus external process, right? Do we want to hire a third party, or does it make sense to bring a service in-house? This would be the position that would be best equipped to deal with that. And we did ask our auditors about hiring this service to do, as an example, a cash handling review. We're looking at between $150,000 and $300,000 to have one review done. That's not to implement the outcomes of that. That's just for them to say, this is where your weaknesses are. And so we're really looking for this position to be able to do that ongoing review and audit of our internal practices, and to make sure that we're minimizing fraud, for one, but also to make sure we're maximizing taxpayer dollars. So I don't know if that answers their questions.
You okay with that answer, response?
I'll be very interested to watch this position. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, you okay with that? Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so if we move on to page 74, 75 is the overview of the org chart for corporate services. Again, nothing changed other than that one position. Page 76 and 77 is the overview of our budget, which is increasing by about $540,000. And rather than walk through it at this level, I'm going to walk through it at the department level so that I can speak to what's happening in each individual division. So on page 78 is the Corporate Services Administration Division. This is myself and my executive assistant, Sherry Anderson, and would include this new internal audit position. On page 79, you'll see the budget change, primarily salaries, the step increases for the two existing positions, and then primarily the increase for the new internal auditor position. Our materials, we've decreased slightly. That's just to align with what our actual experience has been. If we move to page 80, it's the human resources budget. So no changes being referenced there, although I will admit that the HR division's been extremely busy with the pandemic, and we've had some staff pulling double duty, trying to do their own jobs, plus manage some of the pandemic expenses, or the pandemic issues. So kudos to that whole team. On page 81 is the budget for human resources. So a slight increase in salaries and wages, again, it's contractual. Materials, supplies, and services is increasing by $33,000. And that is for two reasons. We've added a little bit more money in there for corporate training. As part of our HR strategy, our people strategy that we developed, it became apparent that there's some additional training that we need to provide to our leaders in particular, and so we've added some additional dollars there. But the majority of that increase, about $20,000 of it, is in reference to our recruitment budget. And so, as the CAO mentioned earlier, we're really struggling to fill positions. Oftentimes, we're having to put postings out more than once. We're getting less applicants. It's really been a challenge, and so we're putting some extra money into recruitment to try and advertise our jobs better, get more information out, to try and generate some more interest in people coming to work at the City of Kawartha Lakes. The contracted services budget is increasing by $125,000, and that's primarily to deal with legal fees associated with our employment relationships. And so that's just right-sizing that budget. We've seen our expenditures have been trending in that neighborhood for the last few years, and so we're looking to right-size that budget for going forward. Any questions on the HR budget?
Councillor Dunn, you had a previous question about the budget returning to norms for HR. Are you okay with the response?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Director up to this point? Councillor Ashmore?
You to the Director. Just going back to page 78 with the internal auditor, I just wanted to understand. So if we hire an internal auditor, you mentioned that we hire external auditors to audit the internal auditor. So how does this work? Like, you have to have somebody outside the organization to audit the inside? If we're hiring an internal auditor, how is that position monitored?
So through the mayor, so the internal auditor and external auditor serve very different purposes. So the external auditor is a requirement under the Municipal Act that we have an audit every year, and they're auditing the generally accepted accounting principles. They're making sure that we are managing our business in compliance with the accounting rules, for lack of a better term. And so, as I mentioned earlier, their level of materiality, because our budget is so big, is 1.2 million. So they're really only interested in the big things. That's what they're looking at when they do their audit. The internal audit is separate and distinct from the external auditor. That will be a staff position in-house, and they'll be looking at the small nitty-gritty details. So they will undertake a review on whatever we believe is the priority. So it may be in cash handling. Council may direct that they want a full review of our procurement practices. Are we actually following our own rules? Are we doing things correctly? And so that internal auditor will look at the details of how we're managing our business, prepare an audit, tell us where our deficiencies are, and then help Carolyn and I to put the proper processes in place to correct any deficiencies that they find. The information that the internal auditor generates will become part of our external auditor or our external audit. We will give that information to the external auditor, which will provide them comfort that we are actually doing our due diligence to make sure that the city's funds are being managed properly.
Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, currently Carolyn's our treasurer for Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes Housing. So would the internal auditor work in that capacity too? Just come over and give us a help on that side?
Through the mayor, they could if that's something we choose to do.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're good, so go ahead.
Okay, so moving on to page 82. This is the org chart for our communications, marketing, and advertising department. It's our small but mighty group of 3. On page 83 is their budget. Not a lot of changes happening here. Again, salaries, wages, and benefits is a common theme in everybody's budget. There's some increase there. Our materials, supplies, and services is decreasing by $9,800. And that's due to some software costs that we had in this budget, and those costs have been transferred over to our IT budget. So although a decrease in communications, there's an offset increase in IT, so no overall impact to the corporate services budget. Moving on to page 84 is the budget for the Treasury group, led by Carolyn Daines. So I'll let her speak to any heavy-duty questions on this budget, but on page 85, we see the salaries, wages, and benefits again increasing. Our materials and supplies and services budget increasing by $1,200. That's just right-sizing the budget again, looking at what our actual experience has been and what we've been spending. We needed a little bit more budget there. Our contracted services budget's going up by $5,000, and that's a new accounting requirement that's coming out for asset retirement obligations. And so because this is some new legislation, we'll be looking to hire some supports to assist us with that. Our debt, lease, and financial is going down. There was a $100 budget there. I think that was likely an error, and so we've removed that. And then those interfunctional adjustments that council loves, an adjustment there as well, and that's allocating costs, I believe, between departments. Any questions on that budget? Seeing none, we'll move on to page 86 is the Revenue and Taxation Division. Again, this is the group that issues our water bills and tax bills. No changes to the org chart for this group. Page 87 is their budget. We are seeing an increase in our user fees. We've got an increased revenue of $40,000. That's to do with revenue that we expect to get through additional tax certificates and new account fees. As the municipality is starting to grow and as the sales market is strong right now, we're seeing an increase in that activity, and so we're able to charge more. On the expense side, our materials, supplies, and services budget is increasing by $19,000. That's predominantly to deal with postage, mailing out all those tax and water bills. And then contracted services, a decrease of $14,200. And that's, there's been a historic budget there to hire external plumbers if we needed it on the water and wastewater side when we're installing meters. We've historically not used that budget line item, so we've simply removed it in this year. And then the final budget within corporate services on page 88 is our information technology group. No
Director,
change to the...
Let me just, Councillor Helmsley has a question on your revenue and taxation before we move on. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I don't know if this is the right place. I don't even know if you would know. MPAC has an office here. Do we charge them rent for that office? And where is it shown if we do?
To be honest, I don't believe we do. Oh, Carolyn has the answer.
Through you to the councillor, yes, we charge them rent, and it's in corporate items.
Here we go. Go ahead.
Okay. So page 88 is the org chart for Information Technology Division. No changes to the staffing there. A number of changes to the budget, though. This is the area within corporate services where we always see the most budget changes. So in materials, supplies, and services, there's an increase of $85,000. The majority of that is new licensing costs and technology costs associated with the new positions that we're hiring. So we bring new positions on. Obviously, we need to make sure they have the technology to do their job and the licensing for the various software. Under contracted services, increase of $178,000. There's a myriad of items in here. There's the cost of living increase on all of our maintenance agreements, so all the software that the city owns. We have maintenance agreements in place, but cost escalation happens on an annual basis. So that's $78,000 of that. The additional items, we've got some new cybersecurity contracts in place. This is to do penetration testing and vulnerability scanning to make sure that our systems are safe from, well, as safe as they can be from cyber attacks. There's a new Citrix contract. Citrix is the system that allows staff, when they're working remotely, to be able to connect into our network. There's a JDE contract and some other third-party support contracts that we have in place, and that's really to help us maintain our systems working as efficiently and effectively as they do. And that's the end of the corporate services budget, unless there's questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Director on corporate services before we move on? Seeing none, thank you. I think we'll do development services and then we'll take a break for lunch, if everybody's okay with that. Acting Director Holly. There you are. Welcome, sir. You want to walk us through starting on page 90? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So development services is made up of 4 separate divisions. So we have the building division, which is responsible for issuing building permits, demolition permits, septic permits as well. And they do a number of other, perform other functions. Suzanne Murchison heads up that division. Then we have the economic development department, which is responsible for all things economic development. So business assistance, dealing with labor matters, also arts and culture, things as well as heritage. And Rebecca Mustard is the manager for that division. We have mapping and GIS division, and they are headed by James Auld, who's the supervisor there. And they deal with the city's geospatial data and enterprise systems, all of the front-facing apps, and so on and so forth. And finally, we have the planning and building division, and Leah Berry is the acting manager there. We look at we do a number of growth-related planning, official plans. We also look at a number of various studies, and we process a number of development applications in that division. Next page, page 91. So there's a number of things that are happening, continue to happen within development services. So one of the major items, obviously, with the planning division is dealing with the Ontario Land Tribunals related to the official plan, and as well as the secondary plans. So there are a number of different items that are happening to try to get us to get an official plan that's going to be in place, as well as the secondary plans. That program will continue next year, and there will be a variety of hearing dates that have been scheduled. It has, I think, part of the sort of setbacks have been somewhat pandemic related, but we expect that will continue on in next year. We also continue to work on the aggregate policy review, although that is one of the items that we've sort of put on hold because of staffing issues. So we're hopeful that we can get that back on track next year. We've also started the city's growth management strategy update. So that will take us to population and employment forecasts to 2051. So we have external consultants helping us with that. And there's a task force that has been struck on that, and that project is very much on the way. We want to start the commercial policy review, agricultural systems, and natural heritage system studies. So a lot of these studies are really going to help us start with the municipal comprehensive review, or the review of the official plan. As we have to start to move into that program, a lot of these studies are going to help to focus that program and provide all the background to that program. We have started the active transportation master plan this year. We've got consultants hired on, and we have started that. We are also looking at an additional staff member for environmental policy, and that person will deal with things such as the healthy environment plan and the tree preservation plan. I'll get a little bit more into detail on the position itself, but the idea is that position will really sort of focus a lot on the healthy environment plan, which is being moved into the development services department. We continue to implement the rural zoning bylaw project. Again, that was slowed down due to the pandemic, not being able to work on the project as diligently, and we also had to sort of postpone it because of obviously consultation purposes. But the project is back on course. We are planning to have a task force meeting in the next couple of weeks prior to the holidays, and preparing for a public release of the draft rural zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw has been reviewed sort of internally, quite a solid review. So we feel that it's a good product that's being released to the public for review, and we are looking forward to having consultation on that in the new year. The Economic Development Department is looking to update its economic development strategy. It's a special project, and there was a motion this morning on that as well. So the strategy needs to be updated to look at all the different strategies for obviously the agricultural sector, arts and tourism. So that is going to be headed up through Rebecca Mustard in economic development. They're also continuing with development through the $1 Million Makeover, Digital Main Street, and the Kawartha Lakes Innovation Cluster pilot programs. All those programs have been very, very successful and very helpful in helping us, especially get through the pandemic. So the continued support of those is very crucial for us moving ahead. Also implementing a business and workforce attraction marketing campaigns. We've been working with Fleming College on some of the workforce retraining, and that has been quite successful as well for us. And release of new GIS websites with publicly accessible mapping services. James Auld is continuing to work on that for us. Any questions on that so far? Thank you.
Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question on the implementation of the rural zoning bylaw. We engaged a consultant from Kitchener, I believe. Do we still have that consultant, and is that consultant working with our staff to help us get this completed? Because I remember we had a meeting in Downeyville in 2019, and they made a presentation. Are we still partnering with them, or are they still on contract to help us finish this project?
Through the mayor to Councillor Ashmore, yes, WSP is still on contract with us, and we have been working with them on the continued development of the rural zoning bylaw, and they will be engaging in all of the public information sessions when those get rolled out in the new year.
Councillor Dunn, you had a question as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. Under the Development Services Administration and Planning page, are we currently up to staff as far as our planners go?
To the mayor, through the mayor to the councillor, I know we do have some vacancies. It's in the sort of the policy area. We've had some difficulties recruiting, but we're going to try one more time, I think in the new year, to recruit an additional policy planner as well, planner 2.
Okay, so under the development planning portion, with our 6, 7, and counting the supervisor, 8 positions, are those positions all currently filled?
Through the mayor to the councillor, so I guess technically, so myself, I'm obviously I'm in the acting role. Leah Berry has taken over the acting role as the manager of planning. So technically then the supervisor role in the policy end is vacant, as well as a policy planning position. So those are 2 vacancies that we have in that department currently.
Okay. Now, the Healthy Environment Coordinator, will that be a planner or will that be something else?
The mayor to the councillor, it will be a non-union position, and it will be sort of on the same vein as the large planning projects officer. The reason for that was to have that person available to to conduct any type of evening sessions and so on and so forth if that was necessary. Also having them out of the have them in a higher level so that there is some decision-making capabilities there. So that position is going to have to engage with a number of other departments within the city. So we wanted that person to have a certain level and have some decision-making capabilities.
Okay, so, but it won't be a planner, like as far as a trained planner goes, it'll be something else, but not a planner.
To the councillor, it will likely be a planner.
Okay.
Because we're looking to have that person also help out with other environmental policies So for example, the tree preservation plan, we're also looking to have that person implement the natural heritage system strategy. That's the mapping that the province created in 2018. So we're looking at that person to sort of be all things environmental planning within our department. Obviously, if they will be helping us with environmental policy in the official plan as well. So it will very likely be a land use planner from that perspective.
Okay, and do we currently have a tree preservation bylaw?
Through the mayor to the councillor, no, we do not. That was a project that Anna Kalnina was working on, and that with her departure, that project has been put on hold.
Okay, so they wouldn't actually be implementing the plan because there's no plan there right yet?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll give you a motion.
We're just on page 91, so can
Okay,
we wait
sure.
till we
Yeah,
work
yeah.
our way through?
I can come back to it, yep.
Go ahead. Any other questions for the director up to this point? Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. So page 92 gives us our personnel breakdown. We have 2 additional positions that are requested. One is in planning. It's the essentially environmental planning coordinator, as well as in building. We're looking for an administrative position. There were 2 questions that we had sort of related to personnel. I believe we've spoken about the first one, which was the role of the Healthy Environment Coordinator. That question was raised by Councillors Richardson and Dunn. Presuming that question has been answered.
Councillor Richardson, are you satisfied with that position?
Yeah, my thought process was the same. It's catching up on some of those environmental policies, but also, you know, that position creating some opportunity to help with catching up on planning applications.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're good on those questions, so go ahead.
Okay. There was another question asked by Councillor Dunn, and that was to deal with the additional administrative person that was requested in the building division. Obviously, the building division is going to be very busy in the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years. We expect that there is going to be a lot of change in the City Kawartha Lakes from a development perspective. There are a number of changes that are happening. A lot of what the current AAs do. So there's a complement of 2 AAs within the division. There are a lot more requirements to deal with financial matters. So cash receipting. Also, there are some functions that building is inheriting to deal with the development charges and inputting of all of those costs and doing a lot of the banking functions. One of the things with electronic banking, obviously it makes it far easier for the public. However, there are a number of activities that we have to do to accept those e-transfers. So there is a lot of accounting that goes on with that. So that is being sort of transferred to the building division. So the additional requested administrative assistant would largely have a financial role in handling cash receipting, doing all the breakdowns of development charges, and any other banking matters that are required. We expect that we're going to have a large volume of building permits in the next number of years, and that's the rationale for that position.
Richard, and I'm going to assume that position is covered by the increase in the building fees that we just approved last month for next year, correct?
Yes, it will be.
Thank you. Any questions on that for the director? Did you have somewhere you wanted to go?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm comfortable with the administrative assistant. I'm comfortable with the explanation. And I have no issues with that one. The Healthy Environmental Coordinator, we're already down a planner. We're having a hard time recruiting one, yet we're going to create another position where we're going to try and recruit a second one. And they're going to enforce a bylaw that we don't have yet. So I will make a motion that we delete that position from the 2022 budget, and if in fact in 2023 those other pieces fall into place, maybe we can put it on the 2023 budget. But I can't understand why we're doing it now when we've already got gaps that we can't fill, and we're bringing somebody on to enforce a policy that we don't have. I just think it's premature. And if I get a seconder, I guess, well, I already spoke to it, so I...
So your motion is to remove the Healthy Environment Coordinator from the org chart for 2022?
Yep.
New position. Moved by Councillor Dunn, second. Councillor Yeo. You've already spoke to it.
Yep.
Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Dunn or Councillor Yeo?
I second it more for conversation, maybe want to talk about it. I'll leave it at that, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna ask the CAO to talk to it, but I think there's more to it than for a policy that we haven't implemented yet. You're taking a small piece of it, and I think there's a bigger role there. Maybe it hasn't been explained properly. Yes, the tree preservation is part of it when that comes online, but to say we don't have a policy, why are we hiring somebody to implement it? I think you're talking about a very small piece of the pie that you know, we put a strategic plan together about our environment, and if we now need a person to push these policies forward, otherwise they're not going to get done. So we need to stop making priorities if we're not going to follow up and have somebody to follow them through, would be my hesitation in your motion there. But I'll get CEO to talk to it. Go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So, and this is one that probably personally I recommended that we put in the budget in this place, but really it was a position that is somewhat corporate serving, but I think the best business case is to align it with some additional planning function. And so the acting director spoke very clearly about its role in planning, sort of policy development. As you can appreciate, that world alone is getting so much more complex. We're short on staff. Although it is a planner that will be a baseline, I think we're more confident that based on the job description, we'll be able to recruit for this particular position. But I certainly respect the comments about sort of the ongoing difficulties with the entry-level policy planner that we were trying to fill or backfill as well. I think the big piece that's maybe being missed in the business case is more to do with the broader sort of corporate function and the council strategic plan. And healthy environment and environmental initiatives, unfortunately, to some extent, have been put on the back burner in terms of priority projects for us the last couple of years. You've already heard from a couple of the directors. You'll probably hear from more. We're looking at sort of our greenhouse gas emissions plans, our healthy environment plan implementation. I don't take that, it's not just a plan to say we're going to do good things sort of in the environment. It has many actions outlined in it. And so this position is really going to be that ambassador, drive it through. And I'll say the third piece that they'll do that's a little bit unique is really serve as a liaison with the conservation authorities a little bit more actively. So you've seen in past budgets, this department has had sort of loose oversight for the conservation authorities' budgets and some of the programs and projects there. But with the ever-changing sort of legislation on that front, we need to have somebody that is laser-focused on environmental issues and partnering with those groups. So apologize that that expanded sort of business case wasn't available before, but you know, based on sort of where we're heading in 22, I think this is a really important position corporately and in that department to drive a lot of initiatives forward.
Thank you. We got a bunch of questions. So Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak against the motion. I think if we're going to add bodies anywhere, adding them in planning and in building is the place it has to go. I can't tell you how many phone calls I get about how come I can't get my project move forward in the planning department? How come I can't find a building inspector? How come building inspector can only show up a week from now? I'm waiting to pour concrete. It just goes on. And I think, you know, I'd be quite happy if we hired the internal auditor and put it in planning, if they could do some planning as well. It just, to me, we are so short-staffed in that department, and we have so many priorities and so many pressures on them to get things forward and done that I think that it is money well spent, and certainly something we need to do for all the reasons that have previously been explained. So I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vale, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the admin assistant for the building department. I'm not necessarily against the healthy environment coordinator. I guess my concern is, is what direction are we going with the planning department? We've got an acting director, we've got an acting manager. We don't have a manager or supervisor of policy, but we're adding a position and a new position. My concern is are we putting the cart before the horse? Are we going to put a director in place or a manager in place that are going to look at this, and that's not the direction that they're going to want to take this department, right? Since the change of putting those acting individuals into place or whatever, there hasn't been a lot of conversation either about processes and changes in processes, or none of that has come forward. So some of that is my concern, and I'd like to know what direction and where we're going process-wise and with those positions before we start changing and adding more beneath that.
CEO, do you want to respond to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll do my best. I mean, to some extent, yes, there is a plan. Obviously, that org chart, our objective is to fill it and on a permanent basis. So yes, two of our leaders have sort of shifted through, and there has been a tentative vacancy. I think it should be appreciated that they're not sort of operating in those conventional roles, and we're in a pandemic. So they've had to shift down, wear probably multiple hats, do multiple duties, and really cover off what were the portfolios of the three positions in total. But again, trimming them down and slimming them down to the best that we can. I would suggest probably the opposite in terms of the time is perfect to start to look at building the policy section. I would suspect how we staff the area, it's been well investigated, and I think a combination of then recruiting or looking at a supervisor and subsequently this environmental focused position, the timing is never better. And in fact, we would probably be recruiting similarly at the same time for both positions. They both are baseline planners. They're both senior positions overall in the org chart. I will be concluding sort of the current conditions where we're at from an acting perspective, and then we'll be looking to doing the necessary recruitments based on those decisions. But I wouldn't be able to explain in detail sort of in this venue, sort of where we're heading, but timing is imminent, and we will be going to sort of the next phase in recruiting for these other vacancies or positions.
Okay. Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to Acting Director Hawley. I had thought that we were down at least two positions, either the planner ones or planner twos. Have we not filled those positions yet before we filled this one here that we're talking about, this new position? A sort of a specialized planner that's only going to be dedicated to environmental issues, and if the public thinks that we're going to be streamlining things, well, maybe we're going to be actually throwing up more hurdles. So it's not going to speed things up. In fact, it might slow things down. So, but my question is, where are these planner ones and planner twos that we really wanted? And can you answer that, please? Thank you.
Through the mayor to the councillor, certainly. We have been able to recruit a full roster of planner ones. So we now have 3 planner ones. We recently hired the third one a couple of months ago. The person is coming along well and will soon be able to handle sort of inquiries sort of on their own. And the other planner one was retained, I believe, about 5 or 6 months ago. So that person has come along extremely well too. What that has allowed us, or will continue to allow us to do, is free up the planner twos from handling development inquiries and let them focus more on their jobs. That is dealing with applications, dealing with minor variances, consents, and getting through some of that backlog. Obviously, we've been looking at ways to look at priority projects and dealing with them. But I think the good news is that we do have a full roster of planner ones, and they will be in a very good shape to handle all of the inquiries that we get, which are fairly substantial. We are down just 1 planner 2, and that is in the policy group, as well as the policy supervisor.
So we're down 2 then right now before we hire this position?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, and through you. I support this position just from the information provided that it is helping us catching up on our environmental policies. It's adding another body in there which will actually help with the application process. And also the fact that we have a wave of development coming our way, and I really believe this is a critical part of our planning department. So at this time, I think we need to have this position put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly?
Yes, I too will be supporting this position. I think anything we do has been mentioned before, and we know that the healthy environment is going to be a big part of going forward with any of our plans, as Director Hawley has already spoken to already. And I just think that any help we can get in this department is certainly good help and needed help. And as we well know, it's going to certainly be very busy in the years coming.
Thank you. So the motion is to remove this position from, future position from the org chart for 2022. Do you want to sum up, Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, everybody's talking like we're actually hiring planners. We're creating another position. We've got 2 vacant positions right now, and now we'll have 3 vacant positions. We're not creating anything, we're just adding more vacant positions. So what we actually create is a surplus at the end of 2022, because all those positions that we currently have, we haven't filled, and now we've got 1 more that we'll have. We're not going to fill it either. I've got nothing. I'd love to have more planners on. I would love to have a healthy environment. But we're not hiring people. We're creating positions that we can't fill. So until we resolve the problem of filling the vacancies that we already have, why put another one on the pile?
Thank you. Going to call the question. Everybody clear on the motion? Okay, call the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3. Motion fails. Okay, Director, any other questions on that? Director, I'm going to ask you to move on then. Move on to your page 94, I guess. Economic development.
Sure. So, economic development is headed by Rebecca Mustard. And the org chart shows all of the different specialties that the department has. Page 95 is the detailed budget, is our overall budget. So a couple of the highlights are there are some changes in funding for the Kawartha Lakes Small Business Entrepreneur Center. Contract renewal. So there is a current contract end date, and we will be renewing that contract. There are some funding changes at the provincial level, which will impact our workforce development programs as well. So those contracts are due to end. So that's something that working with economic development on. So we, in terms of sort of the overall budget, I think some of the highlights are increase in permit fees on the building side. I think the increased development levels are certainly making that a good news story. Page 96. I think sort of overall there are the changes in the budget are sort of really looking at increases to wages and salaries. We do have a few areas where we're decreasing. So staff training, for example, is going down by about 22,000. Obviously, with the pandemic, things have changed to virtual training and heading out to conferences and so on and so forth. Generally, hasn't happened as much as it previously did. Our postage and office supply budget has gone down as well. To some extent, there's been changes in legislation which allows us to use email notifications a lot more, which is very helpful from our perspective. It's quicker, and we definitely know that people get the emails. So that has definitely helped us with our business as well. There is a small increase to KRCA's budget. Obviously, they made a budget presentation a couple weeks ago as well. They will be helping us, especially on the rural zoning bylaw end, providing some comments. They're also helping us with the lake management plan implementation and finalizing the other lake management plan as well. So I think that's it for page 96. And page 97 is just sort of the summation for revenue expenses for the conservation authorities. Are there any questions on our budget?
I think we're good. Keep going.
Thank you. Next, we we have the administration and as well as the planning org chart. So that's where the healthy environment coordinator would fit in underneath the policy group. Shows the administration and planning budget. Again, one of the larger increases is wages and salaries. I think there is if you take a look at 2021 and 2022, some of it is due to wage gapping. We certainly had a number of vacancies, and we continue to have vacancies, and hence our 2021 numbers are a bit lower than what we expect in 2022. Any questions on that?
Nope, go ahead.
Thank you. The economic development, again, shows their overall chart. And the next page, page 101, is their budget. The department does work a lot on grants. They're great at securing grants to help offset any costs to the taxpayer. However, some of their grants will be going down. So there are some further discussions that will be happening as a result of that. And we will be bringing a report forward in Q1 on that. Any questions on that budget?
Nope, keep going.
Thank you. Next is the small but mighty GIS division. There is one vacancy there. There is a GIS specialist, and we are actively recruiting there as well. But unfortunately, we haven't been successful on that end. And their budget has a very modest increase due to wages and salaries. Any questions there?
Nope, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Finally, the building division. So we have one administrative assistant requested for that program. The left side deals with the building program. The right side deals with the Part 8 sewage system program. And obviously there will be increases in salaries with respect to the new addition and salary increases in general. We expect revenue to be up as well for with additional permits. Are there any questions here?
Director, Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Director. Just one, I think it's an obvious question, quickly before lunch. How many vacancies do we currently have in the building division?
I believe we have 2 vacant positions in the building division. And again, we're actively working to recruit those positions. Actually, sorry, there's 1 leave and then there's 1 vacancy.
Okay, any other questions on the building services budget? Seeing none. Anything else, Acting Director?
No, I think that's it for my budget.
Okay, thank you for that today. I think what we'll do is, we appreciate that. I think what we'll do is take a lunch break. Why don't we come back at 1:15? It's 12:32. We'll come back at 1:15 and we'll pick up with engineering and corporate assets. Thank you.
Thank you.